Good evening, restless souls. Welcome to the Little Dream, the place where shadows speak, and every creak, every flicker of light, every whisper in the dark tells a story you won't soon forget. Tonight, I will guide you through 5 chilling tales, each one drawn from the darkest corners of fear, regret, and the unknown. From the abandoned industrial grounds where a man witnesses something no one should, to the haunted corridors of a cursed game, through rain-soaked alleys where the dead demand your attention, into the mirrors that do, not merely reflect, but consume, and finally, a supper club where hunger itself waits, patient and eternal. Keep your lights dim, your senses sharp, and remember, sometimes listening is not enough. Sometimes the stories listen back. Asterisk. The eyeless witness. I still remember the first night I stepped into this watchtower, Halloween, but the fog had turned the industrial complex into something unrecognizable, a labyrinth of steel skeletons and shadows stretching farther than the eye could reach. The air smelled damp, metallic, and faintly of old gasoline. My boots squelched on the wet concrete as I climbed the narrow staircase up to the guard post. The tower itself was a relic. Walls of corrugated steel, one heater that rattled as if it had a pulse, and a bank of flickering monitors that cast pale, greenish light across the room. The screens were supposed to be my eyes, my only connection to the ground below. But there was one camera, number 7, that had recorded something no one could explain. The footage had been corrupted, smeared like ink in water, and I was the only one who had ever seen even a fragment of it. I settled into the chair, rubbing my temples. All quiet, I muttered into the walkie. My voice echoed softly through the empty tower. Outside, rain hammered on the roof in uneven rhythms, like fingers tapping impatiently. The heater groaned. Every now and then, a strange, garbled whisper came through the intercom, just fragments, almost like someone speaking from underwater. At first, it was subtle, a smear of red on the monitor. I froze. My stomach churned. The camera's angle hadn't changed. Nothing should have moved. Yet there it was, a streak of crimson across the concrete floor, right where the accident had happened a year ago. My fingers hovered over the console. No, it can't be. Then came the sound. Nails scraping glass. A faint whimper, distorted, slowed down in a way that made it feel wrong. Alien. I leaned forward, gripping the edge of the console. Hello? My voice trembled. No reply, only the scrape and that warped, gurgling sob. I turned toward the window. Fog pressed against the glass in thick, rolling waves. And then the first handprint. A smear of wet, dark crimson, forming on the inside of the pane. My heart thumped against my ribs like a drum. The whispers grew sharper, curling around my ears. You saw it. You saw what happened. Tell them what you saw. I stumbled back, fumbling for the old tape stored in the locked drawer beneath the console. My hands were slick with sweat. The tape was labeled Camera 7, 10 divided by 30, 1 divided by last footage. I shoved it into the VCR. The screen flickered violently, lights jumping across the monitors, and then it played. A face appeared on the grainy footage, pale, almost translucent. Eyes missing. Hollow sockets stared directly through the camera as though peering into my soul. The mouth opened in a silent scream. My breath caught, and I could feel the blood drain from my face. The scraping at the window escalated, synchronized with the warped moan from the speakers. I swayed on my chair. The room spun. My hands reached for the desk, searching for something solid, anything to ground me. And then I felt it 2 wet, round objects pressed against my palms. I froze. My mind screamed denial. But I knew. I knew before I even looked. Eyes, human, warm, wet, and not mine. I couldn't scream. I couldn't blink. The whisper lingered. You saw it. Now it's yours to watch. My vision blackened as the room swirled in vertigo. The monitors flickered one last time before cutting to static, leaving only the distant, haunting wail of some unseen alarm fading into the rain. I sat there, shivering, alone, blind, and forever haunted by the gaze of what I had been forced to witness. The rain had not stopped. It drummed relentlessly against the steel roof of the watchtower, each drop bouncing off the corrugated metal like impatient fingers knocking insistently at the walls. I sat in the darkened room, my palms still sticky and slick from what I had discovered, the eyes warm and wet, a tangible echo of a life snuffed out a year ago. The tape sat in the VCR, humming faintly as though breathing. My breathing had long since become ragged, uneven, each inhale tasting of metallic fear. I tried to tell myself it had been a hallucination, a trick of the mind twisted by isolation, fatigue, and the steady drum of the storm. Yet as the minutes stretched, I felt a weight pressing from the corners of the room, something patient, waiting, something that remembered. At first, it was the monitors. Camera 7 remained dark, but flickers began tiny, almost imperceptible sparks along the screen's edge. Shadow shifted where there should have been nothing, like ink spreading over water, forming shapes that teased recognition. A hand, a head, a gaze. My stomach nodded, and I found myself leaning closer, as if proximity could unravel the mystery. Then came the whispers, not through the intercom this time, but directly inside my mind, faint and fragile. You cannot hide. You cannot turn away. I jerked my head. Nothing. Only the rain, the heater's rattle, the occasional distant clatter from the deserted industrial yard. I rose and moved to the window, pressing my face to the glass. Fog pressed hard against the panes, thick and cold, and there it was, the first shadow outside, dancing between the skeletal frames of abandoned machinery. Its movement was subtle, almost polite, but unmistakably deliberate. It shifted, paused, as though observing me, testing my reaction. My heart thrummed violently. I wanted to scream, to call someone, anyone, but the memory of the eyes in my hands rendered me mute, tethered to fear I could not name. I stepped back from the glass, and the shadows seemed to multiply. In the corner of my eye, I caught movements too quick to be human, shapes flickering in and out of existence. Every monitor glitched in response. I reached for the controls, trying to switch the camera feed, but the console froze. A distorted face appeared on the central screen, featureless, pale, hollow where the eyes should have been, just like the one on the tape. It looked at me with an intensity that rooted me to the spot, and I realized the camera wasn't watching the yard anymore. It was watching me. Something shifted behind me. Light footsteps, almost inaudible over the storm. My fingers fumbled for the door handle, my palms damp with sweat, but the handle resisted, as if held by some invisible grip. I twisted again, and the door creaked open, revealing the hall beyond. Empty. Only the echo of my own heartbeat, and the distant drip of water from the ceiling. I forced myself to step into the hall, each footstep a whisper against the concrete floor. The tower was small, but every shadow seemed exaggerated, curling at the edges, stretching unnaturally. My flashlight lay on the desk, forgotten in panic, so I relied on the monitor's pale glow. As I walked, one of the screens flickered again, this time showing a narrow corridor that I did not recognize, a hallway that should not exist in the layout of the tower. Yet there it was, real in the feed, beckoning with darkness. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I tried to speak, to remind myself that I was a trained security officer. That rationality still existed. It's a wiring glitch. Just a wiring glitch, I whispered, my voice trembling. But the sound that answered was not my own. A soft, gurgling laugh, warped and wrong, emanating from the monitors themselves. I turned toward the sound and froze. A shape stood at the edge of the room, just beyond the heater, just outside the reach of the monitor's glow. Pale, indistinct, swaying slightly, like a marionette caught between motions. I blinked, and it was closer. A step, a trick of the mind. The shadow stretched along the wall, elongating impossibly, and I could feel it pressing against my skull, a cold, invasive presence. I stumbled backward, colliding with the desk. the tape rattling in its slot. The central monitor blinked to life again, the distorted face now speaking, whispering in a voice that slithered inside my head. You saw. You watched. Now watch again, and again, and again. I pressed my palms to my ears, but the whisper was not external. It was inside me, coiling around thoughts, squeezing. My knees buckled. I sank to the floor, dragging my hands over the cold steel. The lights flickered, dimmed, and then brightened in sudden pulses. Every flicker revealed more shadows, more movement in corners that should have been empty. I could sense the shape moving closer, silent but undeniable, a predator that respected no barrier. The tape ejected itself from the VCR, landing at my feet. I wanted to run, but my limbs felt numb, weighed by terror. I glanced down, and for a brief, horrific moment, the eyes, two pale, wet orbs, lay there again, as if reminding me that the nightmare had only begun. I recoiled, but the monitor glitched again, and the same hollow, eyeless face stared at me from a corridor that now seemed to exist within my very room. Something whispered, almost gentle, yet venomous in its tone. They will come for you if you leave. You belong to what you saw. I scrambled to the chair, back pressed against the wall. Shadows seemed to crawl along the floor toward me, impossibly fast, yet silent. My ears caught subtle sounds, dripping water, the hum of the heater, and beneath it all, a faint, deliberate tapping. Not on the window, not on the door inside the room, inside the walls. I could not locate it, yet it reverberated through my bones. I tried to rationalize, to ground myself. Perhaps it was the storm, the building settling, old wiring, but the whispers grew louder, synchronized with my heartbeat, and the shadow at the heater seemed to condense, coalesce into a figure I could almost name. A human shape, but wrong, distorted, with a gaze that pierced not just my eyes, but the very thoughts inside my head. I thought of the victim, of the eyes in my hands, and a horrific clarity dawned. The tower itself remembered. It remembered what had happened, and now it was replaying the tragedy for me, teaching me to see, to witness, over and over again. I rose shakily, forced myself to step toward the monitor that had revealed the impossible corridor. The air grew colder with every step. My breath condensed in front of me, forming ghosts of words that had never been spoken. And then I saw it, not on the screen, but reflected in the metal frame of the console. A pale face, eyeless, hovering behind me, lips moving in a silent command. I spun. Nothing. Only shadows, only fog pressing against the tower's windows. I sat back down, gripping the console, eyes locked on the screen. The corridor flickered again. I could see movement, faint but unmistakable, and then I understood. This was not just a memory, nor just a hallucination. The corridor led somewhere I could not follow, and yet it beckoned, taunting me. I had seen what had happened, and now the shadows would not let me forget. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time had lost meaning. Every flicker of the monitor, every tap from the walls, every whispered word pulled me deeper into a reality that was no longer mine. I realized then that the tower itself had become alive, a sentient keeper of horror, replaying its tragedy and imprinting it upon me, the lone witness. I wanted to close my eyes, to escape, but I could not. Every time I blinked, the shadows shifted, closer, forming shapes I could never unsee. The flickering lights revealed details my mind tried desperately to ignore. Hands pressed flat against walls from within the shadows, pale arms reaching out through corners, mouths opening in silent screams. And through it all the whispers continued. Watch, watch, watch. By the time the storm began to wane, I had learned one immutable truth. The watchtower does not forget. It does not forgive. And I was no longer merely a guard. I was the vessel, the witness. And the shadows, they were waiting. I thought I had seen everything the watchtower had to offer. I thought the tape, the shadows, the whispers, and the eyes in my palms were the apex of horror. But the tower does not suffer fools. and it does not forgive those who dare to witness. When I reached for the tape again, trembling hands barely holding it, I realized the true nature of what I had unleashed. The tape wasn't just damaged, it was alive. When I slid it into the VCR, it hissed like a serpent, dragging itself into the machine with a sound that seemed to echo through my chest. The monitors flickered violently, not in the usual static, but in staccato pulses that formed shapes that reminded me too vividly of human faces. They were contorted, eyeless, and staring, a chorus of the damned, and they seemed to scream without sound, pulling at my sanity. I backed away from the desk, my palms pressed against the cold steel wall, trying to convince myself that this was an illusion, a trick of the storm and my own frayed nerves. But the first voice came soft, deliberate, and unmistakably human. You shouldn't have seen it. You shouldn't have touched it. I whirled around, scanning the room. Nothing. Only the monitors, flickering, showing the same corridor that had appeared the night before. The hallway wasn't part of the building. It didn't exist, but the feed was so sharp, so unnervingly real, that I felt I could step through it if I dared. And behind it, a shadow shifted. Not vague this time, but solid, upright, moving with purpose. I tried to grab the tape again, to eject it, but the VCR refused. The machine hummed, then groaned, vibrating against the desk, and I felt the air thicken around me. A cold wave rolled through the tower, washing over my sweat-soaked skin. The shadows lengthened, creeping along the walls, along the floor, stretching their invisible hands toward me. Every instinct screamed to run, but my feet were frozen, nailed to the floor. The whispering intensified. Not a single voice, but a chorus, layering over itself. Watch, witness, pay attention. It filled my head, every thought I tried to think replaced by their command. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it was useless. The sound was inside me, inside my skull, searing. And then I heard a thump behind me. I spun. Nothing. Just the heater rattling, casting a flickering glow. But in the reflection of the steel desk, I saw it. A figure. Indistinct. Pale. Standing upright, but malformed. Its face smooth and featureless where the eyes should have been. It mimicked the movements of the tape, reaching toward me with long, impossibly thin fingers. My breath caught. I wanted to scream, but my throat was paralyzed, locked by fear. The tape jumped in the VCR. The feed changed, showing the interior of the tower, but not as it was now. The monitors displayed the past, moments from the day of the accident, distorted and corrupted, but horrifyingly clear in intent. I saw the victim walking, unaware, a shadow looming behind them, approaching silently, inexorably, and then the moment, the eyes gouged, the hands reaching, the scream that never was captured by sound but was visible in the distortion, a perfect echo of terror. I stumbled back from the desk. The room itself seemed to pulse with life, breathing around me. The heater whined like a wounded animal, and the monitors glared like accusing eyes. My palms tingled. I dared a glance down. The eyes were there again, glistening, warm. My stomach nodded. My hands twitched toward them, and I knew if I touched them again, I would be tied to this tower forever. A movement caught my eye. The corridor on the central monitor, my only window into the outside of the tower, shifted again. This time, it extended beyond the screen, stretching into the room itself. A dark shape emerged, indistinct but undeniably human. It paused, head tilted, featureless face peering at me, and then it whispered, voice like silk coated in ash, "You were chosen, and you cannot leave." The shadows began to thicken, coalescing into multiple figures now dancing at the edge of the light. They moved fluidly, impossibly fast, yet their presence was weighty, oppressive. Every hair on my body stood on end. I could feel them breathing around me, their non-eyes boring into my skull, filling every corner of my mind. I thought, I have to destroy the tape. I have to end this. I lunged, tearing it from the VCR, intending to throw it to the floor. But before it left my hands, the machine spit it back, snapping my wrists, a shock running through my body. I stumbled, crashing into the desk. The tape hissed again, as though alive, as though angry, as though it had been waiting for me to try this. I looked up. The monitors now displayed me. Me. My image, captured live and yet wrong. My face, paler, eyes hollow, staring back from every screen, and my own voice emerged. Warped. Echoing me, whispering, "You cannot leave. You cannot unsee." I fell to my knees. The figures from the shadows emerged fully now, bodies distorted, walking toward me, floating, sliding, merging with the monitors. The room itself seemed to tilt, the floor breathing, the walls bending. I screamed, and as I screamed, the tape slid from my hands on its own accord, spinning on the desk, rewinding, playing scenes I had not recorded, scenes that should not exist. Through the flickering screens, I saw myself a guard, alone, terrified being approached by the eyeless figure. And as the figure leaned close, it opened its mouth in a silent scream, and my mind heard it. Every scream, every plea, every whisper of the damned came flooding into me at once. I doubled over, clutching my head, my ears ringing, my vision swimming, and then the room went quiet. The monitors went black. The tape stopped spinning. The shadows evaporated, or so I thought. I opened my eyes to the tower as it was before, still normal, only I could still feel them. The weight of their gaze, the memory of the touch of those eyes in my palms, lingered. The corridor on the monitor remained, faintly lit, beckoning. My hand shook as I realized I was not alone, not truly. Something had followed me, tethered to my sight, to my memory, to the witness in me. I left the console, stepping toward the window. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing the twisted skeleton of the industrial complex. I wanted to run, wanted to escape into the night, into the rain, but the air felt heavy, thick, as though filled with their presence. I couldn't tell if the weight pressing on me was fear, guilt, or something older, something alive. I tried to rationalize. Perhaps it was my mind. Perhaps isolation, exhaustion, trauma. But deep down I knew. The tower had chosen me. I had seen what it wanted me to see, and there was no undoing it. Hours passed, or was it days? Time no longer had meaning. Every flicker of the monitors, every creak of the steel, every distant rumble of the storm reminded me. I was the witness, and witnesses do not get to leave. I sank into the chair again, trying to focus on my breathing. I had to survive. I had to endure. But a part of me, a dark, gnawing part, knew I was already lost. The tape, the tower, the shadows, they were patient. They would wait. And one day, I would look up, and the corridor would open again, and the eyeless witness would come for me in full, demanding not just observation, but participation. I tried to close my eyes, tried to block it all out. But even in the darkness behind my lids, I saw them. Eyes, eyeless faces, waiting, watching, whispering, "You cannot unsee. You are ours now." And I knew, with absolute certainty, that the watchtower had only just begun to teach me its lesson. The room had grown colder. Not the ordinary chill of the industrial tower, but a biting, viscous cold that seemed to seep into my bones. My palms still tingled from the memory of the eyes. I couldn't touch them anymore. They were part of me now, lodged in some place between my flesh and the dark corners of the tower. But even without touching, I could feel them, watching, judging, reminding me that I had crossed the threshold of being a mere observer into something far more perilous. I forced myself back to the desk. The tape remained in the VCR, spinning in a loop as though alive. The monitors flickered. The distorted hallway appeared again, stretching impossibly into the room. And then I saw movement, at first subtle, like the slight shiver of a curtain in a breeze, but then unmistakable. A figure had emerged from the darkened corridor. It was thin, almost skeletal, its shoulders hunched, its head unnaturally elongated. And where eyes should have been, there was only smooth, pale skin, flawless in its emptiness. I tried to speak. Words failed me. My throat tightened, dry and uncooperative. The figure tilted its head slowly, as though studying me. its gaze penetrating without eyes. And then it moved, not with feet, but sliding, gliding, almost swimming through the air, until it was close enough that I could feel its presence pressing against my chest. "Do you remember?" it whispered. The voice was layered, multiple timbres at once, fragile and broken yet deliberate, an echo of every scream the tower had ever consumed. I shook my head, trying to deny it. I don't. My words were swallowed by the tower itself. The monitors flared. The hallway behind the figure exploded in static, revealing fragmented images of the past. I saw the industrial site a year ago, the day the victim disappeared. Shadows flitted across walls where none should exist. Machinery moved as though possessed, clawing at the air. And then, the moment I had avoided thinking about the victim, eyes wide with terror, reaching out, and then nothing. A black void, where their face should have been. I fell back in the chair, sweat cold on my back. The figure approached. With each glide, the tower seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting around me. The walls warped, the monitors bent at impossible angles, the floor rippled beneath my weight. And through it all, the whispers never stopped, layering over each other. "Witness. Observe. Do not turn away." I wanted to scream, to destroy the tape, to flee, but my body refused to obey. Every muscle was locked in terror. My eyes, my real eyes, flicked toward the tape. It began to rewind itself, fast, jerking violently, as though rewinding reality itself. And then I understood. The tape was not recording history. It was reconstructing it, shaping it around me, drawing me in. I tried to look away, tried to close my eyes, but the eyeless figure hovered directly in front of me. It raised a thin, almost skeletal hand, and I felt a pressure against my temples. My vision shattered into fragments. The room exploded into kaleidoscopic images. My face reflected a dozen ways, each twisted, each screaming silently. The victim's face, eyeless, staring, shadows, slinking along walls that shouldn't exist. The tower itself had become a labyrinth of mirrors, reflecting every horror, every whisper, every shred of memory. I heard my own voice, but not mine. It was distorted, overlapping with the voice of the figure. "You cannot leave. You are part of it now." The witness becomes the watched. Panic surged through me, and for the first time, I moved. I stumbled toward the window. I needed air, needed reality, but the glass reflected. Not the outside, not the industrial wasteland, not the fog. It reflected the interior of the tower. Endless halls, corridors, shadows crawling on the walls, faces countless, eyeless, pressed against the glass, staring at me. And at the center, the victim, reaching out again. A crash behind me made me spin. The monitors had fallen, screens shattered, wires sparking, static hissed, filling the air, coiling into the corners like smoke. And then, the tape ejected itself from the VCR, flipping across the desk, landing face up. On it, scrawled in a hand I did not recognize, letters burned into the surface. "They will see through your eyes." I felt the words sink into me, into my body, into my sight. My eyes burned, and for a fleeting second, I saw through them. I saw the tower as it truly was. Not a building, but a cage of despair, of collected fear. Every shadow, every whisper, every eyeless face I had glimpsed. Before they were all bound here, feeding off observation, feeding off the act of witnessing. And I was the newest conduit. The figure hovered impossibly close. I could feel the heat or lack thereof radiating from it. A hand reached toward my eyes. Instinctively, I recoiled, but the tape slipped under my wrist, unrolling itself across the desk. The film seemed to writhe, curling, twisting, and the images projected into my mind with a force that stole my breath. I was both inside and outside my body, watching myself, caught in a loop I could not escape. Then the whisper, "Give us sight. Let us see again." My hands, trembling uncontrollably, rose. I wanted to resist. I wanted to fight, but my palms itched. The memory of the eyes I had held returned in overwhelming intensity. I realized I could not resist. If I did not comply, the vision would consume me entirely. And yet, as I reached out, a voice my own, small, fragile, defiant, spoke inside my head. "No, you are mine, not theirs." The figure recoiled, and the monitors flickered violently. For a moment, the room returned to something resembling normalcy. The tape lay inert, the static gone, and the whispers paused. My breathing was ragged. My hands shook, but I still had control. For the first time, I understood the balance. The tower did not just trap victims. It tested them. It demanded acknowledgement of fear. But survival depended on claiming agency even while terror gripped every sense. I sat in silence for what felt like hours. The fog outside had thickened again, moonlight barely reaching the steel skeleton of the complex. The wind whispered through broken windows, carrying the faint echo of cries, of static, of eyes. And in the quiet, I realized I had seen enough to understand the tower's rules. Witnessing is dangerous. Observing is deadly. But participating, acknowledging, resisting, claiming my own vision was how I survived, at least for now. And yet, even as I convinced myself of this fragile truth, a shadow flickered across the desk. The eyeless figure had not left. It was patient, eternal, waiting for the moment I faltered, waiting for my vision to shatter again. The tape called to me from the desk, silent now, and I knew it was only a matter of time. The tower was patient. The watchers were patient, and I, the eyeless witness, was bound by the very thing that made me human. Curiosity. I did not sleep that night. I could not. Every sound of the tower, the groan of steel, the drip of water, the faint rustle in the ventilation shafts kept me alert, aware, alive. My eyes, my vision, my perception had become both weapon and weakness. And deep down, I knew that this was only a prelude. The final act, the true confrontation with the tower and its occupants, was yet to come. The eyeless faces lingered in my peripheral vision. I could feel them there, even when the monitors were off. They were patient. They were inevitable. And I, Alex, would have to confront them fully, or lose what remained of my sight, my mind, my soul. The watchtower waits. It always waits. And I know, as I sit here now, listening to the wind whistle through shattered steel, that my shattered vision has not yet seen its worst. I never thought that a single night could stretch into a lifetime. The tower had become a clock without hands, a place where hours and minutes collapsed into one continuous, unending present. My eyes burned from exhaustion, yet I could not close them. Every shadow, every flicker of light, every whisper was magnified in the darkness of the abandoned industrial complex. The air hung heavy with dust, damp steel, and the unmistakable scent of old fear, as if the building itself exhaled the memories of those who had vanished within its walls. I remained at the security desk, gripping the edges, trying to anchor myself to something tangible. The monitor screens, the cold metal of the chair, the uneven tile beneath my boots. But nothing was real in the way I had known reality before. The tape had long ceased to spin in its player, yet its images haunted my vision. I saw them everywhere. Eyeless faces pressing against walls, clawing through shadows, drifting just beyond the corners of my eyes. Their mouths opened and closed soundlessly, whispering demands, accusations, promises. And then the sound began again. Not the faint static or the distant creak of pipes, but deliberate footsteps. Slow, measured, echoing from above. I knew, without looking, that it was coming for me. That figure, the eyeless witness, the collector of sights, had returned. "Time is running," it whispered, layered voices overlapping in a brittle harmony. "The watch is not yours to abandon." I rose from the chair, knees unsteady, body screaming for rest. My own reflection in the shattered monitor glared back at me, hollow-eyed, trembling, the skin pale and slick with sweat. I whispered to myself, hoping to summon some courage. "I have to end this. I have to survive it." The tower responded. The lights flickered violently. The hallways stretched and contracted as if breathing, folding in upon themselves. I could see multiple versions of myself in the monitors. One running, one crouching, one frozen in terror. And yet, only one could move forward. I advanced into the corridor. The footsteps followed, perfectly synchronized with mine. The shadows writhed along the walls, thickening, congealing into forms that resembled the victims of the past. Each step I took brought me closer to the epicenter of the tower's malice, the room where the first disappearance had occurred, where the original victim had lost their sight, their being, and their life. As I approached, I felt it, the pressure in my head, the weight of unseen eyes pressing into my skull. My vision blurred, then cleared, then blurred again, and through it, I saw her, the eyeless figure, tall and impossibly thin, standing at the end of the hallway. Her head tilted unnaturally, and though she had no eyes, I could feel her staring directly at me, drilling into my very mind. "You have seen," she said, voice layered with static and whispers. "You have borne witness. Now you must choose." I clenched my fists, trying to steady my racing heart. "Choose what?" I demanded, though the sound of my own voice made my ears ache. To watch or be watched. To witness or be consumed. The room ahead shimmered, reality folding in upon itself. I could see fragments of the past, the victim reaching for the camera, screaming, the empty halls filled with their echoes, my own hands clutching the eyes that had been left with me. The choice was impossible. To turn and run was futile. Every exit led me back into the tower. To stand and fight was uncertain. I had no weapons but my own resolve, no allies but my mind. I stepped forward, taking the first deliberate stride into the room of horrors. The figure glided toward me, silent, except for the whispering chorus that seemed to emanate from every corner of the space. The monitors flickered one final time, revealing the truth. The tower was not haunted. It was a construct, a labyrinth designed to feed on observation, to bind the living into its eternal witness cycle. Every face, every shadow, every whisper I had seen was a fragment of those who had failed to resist. And now, I was part of it. The figure reached for me. I felt her hands brush against my face, and suddenly my sight exploded. I was everywhere at once, floating above the tower, sinking below its foundations, trapped within the tape itself. I saw the victims, the previous witnesses, their eyeless faces pressed against glass, their mouths whispering endlessly. And then I saw my own eyes, staring back at me, wide and terrified, reflecting the same void that had consumed them all. "Give us sight," the voice said, "so we may see again." I could feel the tape's pull, the insistent tug of the tower, the demand to surrender, to become one with the eyeless chorus. I wanted to fight, to resist, but the weight of countless observations pressed down upon me. My body shook violently. My vision blurred into black and white, static and flicker, shadow and light. And then, in that terrifying instant, I understood. Survival did not mean escape. It meant acknowledgement. It meant claiming the role of the witness without surrendering completely. I reached out, touching the eyeless figure, not with fear, not with surrender, but with recognition. My fingers brushed hers, and in that contact, something shifted. The whispers fell into silence. The shadows trembled. The monitors dimmed. For a fleeting moment, I was alone in the tower. The figure stepped back, dissolving into fragments of mist and static, her message lingering. "We wait. You will see again." I collapsed to the floor, gasping, trembling, aware that the tower had released me, but only partially. I was no longer the same. The tape sat inert on the desk, but I knew it would awaken again. The tower would call once more, seeking the next witness. I had survived, but at a cost. My eyes had seen beyond the veil. My mind had been touched by something eternal, and I knew that somewhere, within the flicker of shadows, the eyeless chorus was watching still. I rose slowly, stepping toward the door. The fog outside had thickened into a dense, suffocating blanket. I could hear the distant hum of traffic, the ordinary life beyond the tower's walls. Yet it felt unreal, fragile. My heartbeat was ragged, my vision sharpened, but every nerve told me one thing. The tower waits. The witnesses never truly leave. And as I opened the door, stepping into the chill of the night, I knew I had taken my first breath of freedom, but the watch had not ended. The eyeless witnesses were patient, eternal, and I had been marked. My eyes, my perception, my very soul would forever bear the imprint of what I had seen. I walked away from the tower, into the fog, my mind trying to reconcile the horrors I had witnessed. And somewhere behind me, I knew the whispers would continue, the shadows would linger, and the tower would endure, waiting for the next witness. The final watch was not over, it had merely begun. The glitch in the game. I never believed in coincidences, at least not when it came to video games. But that night, as I sat in front of my dual monitors, the dim glow of the screens cutting shadows across my apartment walls, I felt the familiar pulse of unease in my chest. Outside, the city was quiet. Halloween, or what the locals called Fog Night, had wrapped the streets in mist, curling around street lamps, making the light feel like it belonged to another world entirely. My apartment, cluttered with cables, figurines, and energy drink cans, felt like a sanctuary. Yet there was something about the game I had just purchased that made me feel exposed, vulnerable. The package had arrived earlier that day. A small, plain envelope, no branding, only my name typed neatly across the front. Inside lay a USB drive and a short note. Handle with care. Some games should not be played alone. My rational mind scoffed. Indie developers love marketing stunts. I shrugged, plugged the drive into my laptop, and watched as the title screen loaded. Midnight Parking. The music was retro, charming, even a cheerful 8-bit melody that could have been from any harmless nostalgic game. Yet beneath it, I could feel a subtle hum, something that vibrated not just through the speakers but through the floor beneath me. I tried to laugh, shaking my head. "It's just sound design," I muttered. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, the mechanical keys clicking under the pressure as I set up the live stream. I waved at the camera, attempting to summon my usual enthusiasm. "Hey everyone, Marcus here. Tonight, we're trying something different. An indie horror game called Midnight Parking. Should be fun. Hopefully." My viewers flooded the chat almost immediately, greetings and jokes scrolling faster than I could read. I smiled, the habit comforting, though it did little to dispel the tightening in my stomach. I guided my character, a faceless, blocky figure, through the dimly lit streets of the game. Overhead lamps flickered, puddles on the asphalt reflecting distorted fragments of light. Everything seemed familiar. Too familiar, almost. The air in my apartment grew cold. I rubbed my arms. Maybe it was the draft from the window. Maybe it was something else. As I maneuvered the character toward a shadowed parking lot, I began to speak. "This part's supposed to be creepy," I said, forcing a casual tone. "But let's see what the game actually delivers." I leaned forward, squinting at the screen. The chat had started noticing something odd. "Is that Leo?" one viewer typed. Another, "Why is the character moving like that?" I froze. The figure in the parking lot wasn't part of the programmed environment. The outline was wrong, limbs stretching in unnatural angles, movements repeating, almost looped, as if the game itself had glitched. My throat went dry. Leo. The thought struck like a fist. My best friend. Dead for a year, the accident still fresh in my memory. I had been the driver. I had been drunk. I had killed him. I tried to dismiss it. It had to be a coincidence. But the figure moved closer, its faceless head tilting, and I realized with a chill that its movements were deliberate. Not random, not a bug, but purposeful, aware of me. The chat was flooding, people typing frantically, but I couldn't look away. Then I heard it, a faint static in my headphones, barely audible at first. Then a whisper, distorted, digital. "Marcus, you left me here." My hand froze on the mouse. The sound wasn't coming from the game alone. It filled the room, surrounding me, vibrating through the floor, crawling up my spine. My pulse raced. I could hear it clearly now. You broke the promises. The next level is for both of us. I spun in my chair. Nothing. Only the dim light of the monitors reflected on the walls, the shadows twitching as if alive. My heart hammered. I tried to tell myself it was a sound effect, a clever trick by the developer, but the way the voice mirrored Leo's exact cadence, the inflection, the familiarity, made my stomach churn with dread. The game glitched violently. The character Leo was suddenly on my screen in close-up, his chalk-white face filling the monitor, the faceless eyes staring straight into mine. A wave of nausea hit me, and I stumbled back, knocking my coffee cup over. Hot liquid seeped onto my desk, but I barely noticed. My vision blurred, pixels and static merging, and the smell of burnt electronics filled the air. I tried to speak, to call out to my viewers. Guys, but no sound came out. My throat felt tight, my voice trapped somewhere between my mind and my lips. The chat was still running, but now the messages were strange, garbled, as if the viewers themselves were being affected. P1 Ayer, T0, J0 in one nung. The figure in the game moved closer, each step synchronized with a pulse I could feel in my chest. I could almost feel his hands on my shoulders, cold and insistent. The keyboard refused my command. The mouse glided under my grip as if held by unseen hands. The room had become a liminal space, half reality, half code, and I was trapped in between. And then the scene shifted, the parking lot melted away into the wreckage of the car, the night of the accident. Leo's face, bloodied, mouth open in a scream that never reached the real world, filled the screen. The sound of metal crunching, tires screeching, and my own panicked breathing engulfed me. The digital and the physical had merged. I fell back, chair toppling, hands scrabbling for the desk. The headset fell off my head, leaving me in the chilling silence of my apartment, but the presence lingered. I could feel it in the room, in the air, pressing down, waiting. The chat was frozen. The USB drive glowed faintly, as if breathing. I knew then, without a doubt, that this game was no longer a game. Something had entered my space. Something that knew my guilt, my sins, my failures, and it had chosen to stay. I realized, trembling, that I would never truly be alone again. The night had already grown heavy when I decided to continue. My hands still shook from the previous encounter, the flicker of the screens, the echo of Leo's distorted voice, the nauseating sense that the game had breached the boundary between digital and real. But as a streamer, I had a duty. To face fear, to record it, to survive it on camera. My viewers expected it, and, perhaps foolishly, I expected it too. I sat back at my desk, the faint glow of the monitors illuminating the mess of cables, empty cups, and game boxes scattered across the room. The USB drive sat in its slot, humming faintly, a pulse in the quiet. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but I hesitated. What if last time wasn't a glitch? What if it was a warning? The chat scrolled endlessly, viewers flooding in, even though my previous stream had ended abruptly. Some were eager, some confused. Marcus, you there? What happened? Is this real? Their words blurred together. I swallowed hard and launched the game again. The title screen appeared, just as innocent looking as before. Pixelated buildings under an 8-bit night sky. The same cheerful music began, but it was slightly off, slightly distorted. Notes lingered too long. A digital echo that didn't belong. My stomach knotted. I entered the game world, maneuvering my character through the familiar streets toward the darkened parking lot where the previous glitch had occurred. Shadows stretched and twisted in impossible angles, corners of alleys forming shapes my mind recognized too well. My pulse quickened. I was seeing things that weren't programmed in. A street lamp swinging even without wind, a puddle rippling though it hadn't rained, and most disturbingly a figure in the distance, standing too still, unmoving. I moved closer. The figure became clearer, pale, faceless, like Leo but warped, glitched, almost skeletal. My heart pounded. The chat erupted. "There he is." Marcus, stop, seriously. But I couldn't stop. I was drawn to it, like gravity had shifted. Then, the shadows flickered. Not just the screen, but the room around me. The corners of my apartment dimmed unnaturally, and I could see them moving, stretching shadows that didn't belong to any object. My chair creaked behind me, though I had not moved. A cold draft brushed my neck. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was the AC or my imagination. The figure's movements became jerky, unnatural. It tilted its head, the pixelated approximation of Leo staring at me directly. Then, slowly, impossibly, it raised a hand. The gesture was human, deliberate. My chest tightened. I heard it. The whisper. Digital, distorted, unmistakably Leo's voice. "Marcus, Marcus, you should have stayed away." The sound came from the speakers, but also from the room itself, as if the air carried it. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling. The chat scrolled wildly, viewers commenting faster than I could read. "Is this scripted? Holy, what is happening? Don't go there." Their words were warnings I couldn't heed. Suddenly, the game glitched violently. The parking lot dissolved into static and noise, and my character was dragged through a series of impossible spaces. A hall of mirrors, each reflecting a different version of my own face, horrified, screaming, faceless. And in every mirror, Leo's figure waited, patient, silent, faceless. The audio distorted. The 8-bit music stuttered and slowed, stretching into warped, metallic echoes. Then came the low hum. A vibration felt more than heard, filling the room, pressing against my skull. I tried to move, but my chair wouldn't budge. The game controls were gone, as if the code itself had become a trap. I could feel a presence behind me. The air thickened, my breath visible, small clouds in the glow of the monitors. I turned my head slowly, nothing, just shadows, stretching long and unnatural along the walls. Yet I knew someone, or something, was there, watching, waiting. My eyes flicked back to the screen. Leo's figure was closer now, impossibly close, yet still in the digital space. It raised both hands, palms facing me, and the distorted voice rang out, "Marcus, you cannot leave. The game is not over. You broke the promise." The room seemed to shudder. The shadows on the walls twisted violently, reaching toward me, scraping at my arms. I tried to scream, but no sound emerged. The static in the speakers intensified, a high-pitched whine that pierced through my skull. The monitors flickered in rapid succession, showing frames of the accident in my car, the mangled body of Leo, the shattered windshield, his face frozen in terror. I staggered back, chair toppling, knocking over a lamp. Light scattered across the floor, illuminating the room just enough to see my apartment had transformed. The shadows were not just shadows anymore. They were tendrils, black and moving, curling along the walls, reaching toward me. I collapsed to the floor, my back against the desk. The game continued without input. Leo's figure now appeared on top of my virtual car, staring down, unmoving. The distorted voice repeated over and over, "You left me. Marcus, you left me." Panic clawed at my mind. I fumbled for the power button, but the monitors resisted. The USB drive pulsed faintly, almost alive. The sound of the keyboard under my fingers became grotesque, each click echoing unnaturally, each press delayed by milliseconds that felt like hours. And then came the whispers, so many voices layered over each other, digital and human, pleading, accusing. "You promised. You failed. Join me. Stay with me." The shadows on the walls writhed in sync with the whispers, forming shapes that almost resembled faces, screaming silently. I tried to cover my ears, shut my eyes, anything to escape. But the digital and the physical had merged fully. My apartment was no longer mine. It was part of the game, part of Leo's torment, part of something I could not comprehend. A sudden flash on the monitor's white light, blinding, static buzzing violently. I was thrown backward from my chair as if pulled by an unseen force. My head hit the floor. The smell of burnt electronics filled my nose. And then, silence. For a moment, I dared to breathe. My apartment seemed normal again. The shadows receding, the game screen frozen on the title page. I crawled toward the desk, heart hammering, fingers trembling as I reached for the USB drive. It was cold to the touch, too cold. And when I picked it up, I felt the unmistakable sense that I was no longer alone, that Leo, or whatever remained of him, was here, not just in the game, but in my apartment, in the air around me. I don't know how long I sat there, holding the drive, staring at the frozen title screen. The shadows had returned to normal shapes, the room quiet, but the sense of being watched lingered, crawling over my skin like tiny fingers. I realized something then. This was no longer a game. It never was. It was a warning, or perhaps it was a trap. And if I didn't find a way to finish it, to atone, the glitch would find me again. I closed my eyes and tried to calm myself. Tried to convince myself it had been my imagination. But deep down, I knew better. The flickering shadows were waiting. They always waited. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. The apartment felt wrong. Even in the cold, sterile light of the ceiling lamp, shadows seemed to linger just beyond the edges of my vision. My hand shook constantly, brushing against the USB drive that had started this nightmare. I could almost hear the faint pulse of something inside it, a heartbeat in code, a whisper of Leo's voice trapped in digital eternity. By morning, I forced myself into my routine. Shower, coffee, checking the stream chat for messages. Most of them were panicked, curious, or mocking, but there were some others. A few new usernames appeared, their comments unsettlingly detailed. "He's awake now. Don't turn around, Marcus. Check the tape. It's waiting." I stared at my monitors, the words crawling across the screen like insects. I tried to laugh it off. Maybe someone had hacked my account, but the tone, the certainty, made my stomach drop. Someone had seen it. Seen what? And why now? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every reflection, my darkened monitor, the chrome of my keyboard, the metallic faucet in the kitchen seemed to echo a presence behind me. I turned quickly, but the apartment was empty. Just empty walls, and the faint hum of electronics. I decided to review the footage from my previous stream. I needed to understand what had happened. Maybe there was an explanation. A bug, a glitch, a hallucination from sleep deprivation. The recording played, the familiar 8-bit theme starting, warped and echoing. My avatar walked into the parking lot. At first, everything seemed normal. Then the glitch appeared. The faceless figure standing still, unmoving, like a statue carved from light and shadow. My heart raced as the figure moved closer. I could feel it before it even spoke, an icy pressure on my spine, a premonition of the terror about to unfold. And then, the audio. That distorted, familiar voice. "Marcus, you left me here." It wasn't a glitch this time. I knew it as surely as I knew my own heartbeat. The pitch wavered unnaturally, modulated like an old tape slowed down. The words repeated over and over, layer upon layer, forming a chorus of accusation. I felt my eyes water, the weight of guilt pressing into my chest. I paused the video, tried to rationalize. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. Leo had died in the accident, had been drunk, careless, but he was gone. And yet, the eyes on the screen, the twisted, faceless shape, seemed to bore into mine. I swallowed hard and continued. The screen stuttered, flashed a strange static, and for the briefest moment, I thought I saw movement behind my shoulder. Reflexively, I spun around, empty, but the air felt thick, heavy, almost wet, like the scent of rain, but sharper, metallic, coppery. I looked back at the monitor. The tape had changed. The parking lot had become darker, more distorted. My character was now standing in a place I didn't recognize. Rows of trees, lined with streetlights flickering. Shadows moved independently of the objects casting them. The faceless figure walked through them, leaving no footprints, just dark imprints that lingered. Then the figure spoke again. This time, the words were more insistent, more urgent. "Marcus, you promised. You can't leave me here. Play the next level. Finish it, or I will come out." I recoiled. The words weren't coming from the computer speakers alone, they seemed to echo in the room itself. My apartment had become an extension of the game, a liminal space where digital and reality blurred. I realized then, the tape wasn't just footage, it was alive. It remembered me. It knew me. And worse, it was teaching me something, or testing me. The glitch intensified. My avatar was now moving of its own accord, guided by the faceless figure. The camera angles shifted, showing angles I hadn't programmed. Overhead views, behind the car, through the windshield, but all distorted, like the lenses of a camera broken and refocused. And then the audio began layering, not just Leo's voice, but the voices of others. Friends I had lost, strangers I had never met, whispering, pleading, accusing. "Why did you leave? We're still here." He's waiting. I clutched the USB drive tightly, trying to ground myself. Sweat ran down my temples and my chest tightened with panic. My hands were numb, but I forced myself to reach for the keyboard, trying to pause the video. The controls, unresponsive. The tape had become a trap, a loop I could not escape. And then the flash. One frame, one single horrifying frame. The accident. My car, twisted metal, Leo's lifeless body. I had seen it 1,000 times in my memory, but this time it was different. The image seemed to linger in the room, imprinting itself onto the air. I could feel the shape of it pressing against my skin, the metallic scent thickening, like blood in the walls. I gasped. The faceless figure stepped forward in the tape, lifting its head. The audio distorted into a guttural wail, a mix of static and human sound. Then the impossible. My wheelchair moved on its own, sliding backward slightly. A cold brush against my shoulder, almost imperceptible, but enough to make me spin around. Empty. And yet, the sensation remained. I was not alone. I returned my gaze to the tape. The figure's hands lifted toward the screen as if reaching through the frame. The distorted voice, garbled and digital, repeated one phrase over and over. "Next level. Join me. Finish it." A sudden image flickered. A hospital room. A heart monitor beeping, flatlining the body of Leo on a stretcher, eyes wide open, staring, pleading. And over it, text in the pixelated style of the game. "System offline. Player 2 joining." The USB drive pulsed again. My fingers felt magnetized, drawn toward it. I hesitated. A primal part of me screamed to throw it away, destroy it, unplug everything. But another part, a part, lured by the impossible blend of guilt and curiosity, pushed me forward. I plugged it into my laptop again. The tape auto-launched. The game resumed. And there, waiting for me, was Leo, faceless, distorted, beckoning me forward. I realized with crushing certainty, there would be no pause, no escape. This tape, this game, it wanted me. And the only way to survive, the only way to stop the flickering shadows and the accusing whispers, was to play, to finish it, to atone. My viewers' chat had stopped scrolling hours ago, leaving only a handful of messages. "Don't. Help him. You can't." And still, I clicked. I should have stopped. I should have thrown the USB drive into the trash, smashed my monitors, called it a night, but the drive pulsed again, faintly glowing like it had a heartbeat of its own. And when it pulsed, I felt it in my chest. A draw I could not resist. The whispers in the apartment, static-laden, digital, yet undeniably human, demanded that I continue. I pressed play. The game loaded faster this time, almost impatiently. The 8-bit title screen glitched and warped, letters flickering like dying neon. Player 2 joining. Blinked repeatedly, taunting me. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling. I thought about Leo, the accident, the guilt, the drunken night that had shattered everything. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe through the panic that clawed at my lungs. The environment loaded. A familiar parking lot. Rain slicked and glistening under a corrupted night sky. The faceless figure was there, standing perfectly still in the center of the lot. My avatar was frozen. Every input I made seemed overridden by an invisible hand guiding me. Then the audio came. The warped voice of Leo, layered and distorted, speaking simultaneously through my headphones, my monitors, the walls. Marcus, you promised you'd finish this. A shiver ran down my spine. I felt as though the apartment itself was bending toward the screen, collapsing around me. The keyboard under my fingers vibrated unnaturally, the hum of electronics deepening into a resonance that made my teeth ache. I took a deep breath and forced myself forward. My avatar moved toward the faceless figure. The rain intensified. Each step my character took caused the ground to ripple unnaturally, like water disturbed by a stone. Shadows stretched impossibly long, reaching toward me. The glitch was no longer contained to the screen. It leaked. I could see it in the corners of my apartment, shifting in the dark. And then, the figure moved. Its motion was mechanical, yet fluid, an impossible combination. It lifted one arm, pointing directly at me. I could feel my heart skip a beat, my own reflection in the monitor distorting with the angle of its gesture. The distorted audio intensified, overlapping layers of Leo's voice pleading, angry, accusing. You left me. You left me. Now play. Finish. Join me. I reached the figure in the game. My avatar collided with it, and everything froze. The sound cut to a low, humming static, and then one frame flickered repeatedly on the screen. The hospital. Leo's face bloodied, eyes wide open, staring. The tape of the accident overlaid onto the game, merging past and present, digital and real. My apartment felt colder. The chair behind me groaned, as if the weight of unseen hands pressed down. A cold gust of air brushed the back of my neck. I dared not turn around. The figure in the game spoke again. This time, more urgently, almost human. Marcus, don't fail me again. Finish it, or we stay here, forever. And I realized then that I was no longer controlling the game. The game was controlling me. My fingers moved, not as my own, typing commands I did not intend. Yes, I'll play. I'll finish. The rain in the game intensified. The faceless figure began to fragment, glitching into dozens of overlapping images, each iteration more horrifying than the last. Every frame distorted, overlapping, layering Leo screaming, my avatar moving, shadows crawling, whispers echoing. My ears rang with the cacophony. And then a final level loaded. The screen displayed a dark room, almost pitch black. The faintest glow illuminated the shape of a bed. And there, lying on the bed, was Leo. The real Leo, or the digital ghost of him? He looked human, but fractured. His face flickered between memory and nightmare, eyes wide, mouth moving in silent pleas. I approached. The whispers rose to a fever pitch, each one distinct yet overlapping. Finish now. It's your fault. Join. Don't leave me. I reached for the bed in the game. My avatar's hands touched Leo's shoulders, and the entire apartment seemed to collapse. Lights flickered. My monitors glitched. The sound of glass breaking, metal scraping, a faint heartbeat echoed. My own reflection on the black screen merged with Leo's face, blinking in perfect synchronization. A single message appeared. Player 2? Ready? I hesitated. My rational mind screamed to stop, to unplug, to run. But my body, driven by fear, guilt, and compulsion, pressed the confirm key. The game loaded one last scene. Nothing but a corridor, endless, dark, lined with doors. Behind each door, a distorted reflection of the accident, the apartment, my own face screaming. Shadows shifted constantly, as though alive. I could hear it then, the whispers, not just through speakers, but in the room. Behind me, around me, inside my head. You will stay with me forever. Player 2. I tried to pull back. My hands were stuck. The keyboard fused with my palms. My monitors flickered violently, each frame showing the same distorted hospital scene, overlaid with every moment of the game. My failures, my sins, and then a single door appeared at the end of the corridor, slightly ajar, light seeping through the gap. A chance. A way out? I moved forward in the game, feeling as if I was walking through molasses, each step heavier than the last. The whispers became screams. Static burst through my headphones. The faceless figure emerged at the door, stretching impossibly, its hand reaching through the threshold. Finish it. Or join me. I forced the key to press the door handle. It opened. Light flooded the corridor. My apartment around me shimmered and bent, as if reality itself was being rewritten. I felt an immense pressure lift off my chest. The whispers faded to murmurs, the static dimmed, and for the first time in hours, or was it days, I felt silence. The game ended. The screen went black. My monitors were normal, the apartment quiet, but I knew it wasn't over. Not really. Somewhere, trapped in digital eternity, Leo waited. And somewhere, in the shadows, I could still feel the pulse of the tape, the heartbeat of the glitch. I sat back, exhausted, numb. I should have deleted the drive, thrown everything into the fire, but I couldn't, because part of me needed to see the final level. And I knew, deep down, that the final confrontation was not with the game, it was with myself. I should have slept, I should have run, but sleep didn't come. Not after what I had seen, not after what I had played. My apartment was quiet, too quiet, and the glow of the monitors reflected in the dark, like twin eyes watching me. I knew I shouldn't look, shouldn't touch, shouldn't think about the drive, but the pulse, the subtle heartbeat inside that USB called to me. Hours passed, minutes blurred. Time was meaningless now. Every shadow in the room moved unnaturally, as if stirred by some unseen hand. My own reflection shifted in the windows, briefly flickering to show Leo, bloodied and faceless, staring back. My stomach turned. I tried to focus on something mundane, a cup of cold coffee, the ticking of the wall clock, but everything had become distorted. Even reality was glitching. The game was still installed. I hadn't uninstalled it. I hadn't destroyed the drive. I couldn't. Part of me needed it. Part of me feared what would happen if I did. But the other part, the rational part, the part of me that still remembered who I was, knew that tonight I had to finish it. I loaded the game. The title screen flickered violently. The glow was harsher than before. The letters danced, corrupted. Player 2 joining. The soundscape shifted no longer. Just 8-bit music, but layered whispers, faint breathing, the distant crackle of a hospital monitor. My heart thumped, every beat echoing in my ears. I moved forward, my hands shaking. The glitchy corridor from before stretched endlessly. Doors lined the walls, all slightly ajar. I could hear something moving behind them. Shadows, shifting, stretching, whispering. Marcus, don't leave me. Stay, forever. I approached the first door. The whispers intensified. I opened it. A scene unfolded. The accident. Leo's face, bloodied, eyes wide, mouth open, in a silent scream. My chest, constricted. I staggered back. The door slammed shut by itself. The next door, my apartment, glitched and looping. My reflection stared back, eyes hollow, lips moving in perfect mimicry. The whispers became louder, almost yelling, accusing, "You left me. You left me." Player 2. I realized then, this wasn't a game anymore. This was a mirror. Every choice, every failure, every ounce of guilt was being amplified, reflected back at me. I couldn't turn away. I had to walk the corridor. I had to finish it. The final door appeared at the end. It radiated faint light, warm yet unnatural. I could hear Leo's voice clearly now, distorted but recognizable. "This is it, Marcus. Do it right. Or join me." My hand shook as I pressed the handle. I expected resistance, some trap, but it opened easily. Inside, a small, dimly lit room. A single bed in the center, and on it, Leo. Not the faceless, glitched figure, but him, or what remained of him. He lay as though sleeping, pale, fragile, yet somehow alive in this digital purgatory. I approached, heart hammering. The whispers faded, replaced by silence. And then, a single voice broke through. "You know what to do." The drive pulsed in my pocket. The USB, the final level, the last choice. I understood. I had to take responsibility. Not in the game, not in the simulation, but in reality. I closed my eyes. I reached down and pressed the final sequence on the keyboard. Commands I didn't consciously type, flowing through my fingers as if guided by something beyond me. The monitors lit up with one last sequence of flashing images. The accident, Leo's face, my hands on the steering wheel, the night I chose to drink. Then blackness. I opened my eyes. Silence. My apartment was normal, my monitors blank. The USB drive lay inert, and yet, I felt it. A presence, faint, at the edge of perception. A pulse, faint and steady, almost like a heartbeat. I knew he was still there, watching, waiting. Part of the glitch had bled into reality. I had survived. I had finished the game, but there was a cost. I stepped outside, night air biting at my skin. The streets were empty, the city quiet. I looked up at the stars. For a moment I felt relief, a fragile reprieve, but I knew it was temporary. The glitch wasn't gone. It was patient, waiting, ready for the next player too. And as I walked down the deserted streets, I felt it Leo's voice, soft and distant, whispering, "See you next time." He shivered. My skin prickled. I knew I would never play another game again. Not fully. Not without the memory of what lurked in the code. The digital nightmare had become a shadow in my reality. And every night, when I closed my eyes, I could still hear it. The static, the whispers, the haunting pulse of the glitch. I am Marcus. I survived. But I am never alone. And perhaps that is the final lesson. Some games don't end. Some mistakes don't fade. And some friends never leave you. Not even in death. I sit here now, telling you this story. My voice calm, almost normal. But if you listen closely, sometimes in the background, in the hum of your electronics, you might hear it too. The faintest whisper, the pulse, the glitch. Player 2 is always waiting. And when you see a game glitch, a flicker, a shadow where there should be none, remember, it is not broken. It is calling, and you might answer. The license plate. I never expected a night of rain to change everything. The storm had come without warning, drumming against the city streets with relentless insistence. I ducked into the small corner store, my coat plastered to my body, shoes squelching with every step. Inside, the dim light flickered against rows of dusty shelves, and the warm, dry air hit me like a soft sigh. For a moment, I thought I might just wait out the storm, sip a lukewarm coffee, and pretend that life outside wasn't rushing in with teeth bared. I wasn't that lucky. Through the cracked window pane, I saw a car speeding down the alley beside the store. Tires skidded against wet asphalt, sparks dancing in the shallow puddles. I blinked, unsure if the water on the glass or the sudden movement had caught me off guard. Then the crash. A sickening thud, metal twisting against metal, a body thrown to the ground. The world became a blur of rain, blood, and the metallic scent that made my stomach churn. The man on the ground tried to rise. I froze. His movements were jerky, unnatural, but with a clear purpose. His head tilted in ways that felt impossible, yet his eyes are the dark hollows where they should have been locked on me. The rain plastered his clothes to his body, but somehow he seemed to move through it, unhindered by the elements that weighed me down. I heard only the water hitting the pavement, the distant rumble of thunder, and the hollow rasp of his attempts to get closer. No breathing, no groans, just the wet slap of his movements and an echoing emptiness where a human should have made sound. And yet, I could feel him. Each step he took sent a tremor up my spine, as though he had claimed the very air around me. He stopped a few feet away from the window. I was paralyzed, trapped between instinct and horror. The man, or whatever remained of him, lifted a hand, pointing directly at me. A hollow void stared back, empty yet insistent. The first words escaped him in a whisper, like wind through a cracked door, almost unintelligible. Remember, the plate. 7-3 Alpha. I shook my head violently. My mind couldn't form the sequence, couldn't catch the fractured syllables. Panic clawed at my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, to run into the storm, to let him vanish back into the shadows. But I was rooted to the spot, caught in the gravity of whatever force had tethered him to me. Then his hand closed over mine. A jolt of pain shot through my arm, sharp and immediate, but not purely physical. The sensation seemed to burrow deeper into my mind. Suddenly, the sequence crystallized. The license plate burned into my memory with the clarity of a photograph. 7-3 Alpha. It was there, etched in detail. The font, the spacing, everything. As if my brain had been forced to record it by a hand other than my own. The man released my hand. The rain continued its relentless assault, but now I heard something else. A subtle rhythm beneath the storm. A dripping that seemed closer, as though the rain had moved inside my own apartment, echoing in every corner. He didn't speak again, merely retreated into the darkness of the alley, dissolving into the storm as if he had never existed. I remember staring through the glass long after he disappeared, hands trembling, soaked to the bone. My reflection was fractured, the dim light casting shadows across my face. I couldn't stop seeing the license plate, couldn't stop feeling the ghost of that grip lingering on my skin. It was more than memory, it was marking. A warning, an imprint, a message I couldn't ignore. The storm subsided by dawn. I called the police, recounted what I had seen, and provided the license plate. They confirmed the vehicle and apprehended the driver. Legally, the nightmare had an ending, but I knew better. Some things don't end when the law closes a case file. Some things remain. Some things wait. I noticed it first on my wrist, a faint, raised line, almost imperceptible beneath the skin. Days passed, and it became more distinct. The numbers and letters of the plate etched themselves under my flesh. I tried to rub it off, tried to ignore it, tried to believe it was a trick of the light or my imagination, but every time I looked it was there. Silent, watching, reminding me of the night the storm delivered a visitor no one else could see. That night, back in my apartment, I lay awake as the rain began again. Only this time, it wasn't outside. It was inside. Water dripped from corners that had never leaked, each drop echoing in perfect rhythm, a relentless metronome counting down some unspeakable moment yet to come. And through it, a whisper so faint I could barely register. You remembered, didn't you? I shivered. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The storm outside raged on, but it was the storm within that terrified me most. Somewhere in the shadows, the man or whatever he was still waiting, still watching, and the imprint under my skin was more than a memory now. It was a promise. The rain will come again, and when it does, I'll hear it. Every drop a reminder, every splash a summons, and I will remember. Always. The morning after the accident, the rain had stopped, leaving the city washed and silent in the gray light of dawn. But the alley, the one where it all happened, was still calling to me. I shouldn't have gone back. Every instinct screamed that I was being foolish, that the memories were dangerous enough without physically confronting them. But some force, something heavier than fear, pulled me toward the place where the man had appeared. The alley looked different in daylight. The slick asphalt reflected the pale sun like a shallow mirror. Puddles stretched across the cracks, but there was no sign of him, no trace of the hand that had gripped mine so tightly. Just the usual detritus of a neglected street. Discarded boxes, rusted trash cans, and the faint scent of wet cardboard. Yet I felt it immediately, even before I saw it. A shift in the air, subtle and cold, like the space itself remembered what had happened. My pulse quickened as I stepped further in, shoes splashing through the shallow puddles. The alley seemed narrower now, shadows clinging to corners even with the light present, and I realized that every sound, my breath, my footsteps, the occasional drip from a rooftop gutter echoed louder than it should. And then I saw it. Faint scratches along the wall, almost invisible unless you looked closely. At first, I thought they were marks from a rat, some stray animal, but the pattern was deliberate. Lines etched deep into the brick, forming symbols I didn't understand, yet somehow recognized, a language of warning, a code meant for eyes that could see the unseen. I knelt to examine them, tracing the grooves with my fingers. The scratches were fresh or freshly exposed. They were wet to the touch, sticky, faintly metallic, and I flinched when I realized the smell. Blood, coppery and sharp, barely dried. My mind tried to rationalize it, but every rational thought fled when I noticed the most important mark. The license plate number, 7-3 Alpha, etched into the wall, as if someone, or something, had carved it directly from my memory. A sudden gust of wind swept through the alley, carrying with it a faint whisper, almost inaudible. You found it. You saw. I froze. My heart hammered, and my hands trembled against the wall. The voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight, filling the narrow space with a sense of presence. Something was there, just out of sight. I strained my eyes down the alley, seeing only the usual urban decay. Still, I felt watched. Every shadow seemed to twitch, every puddle reflecting shapes that weren't mine. I decided to follow the trail, moving cautiously along the length of the alley. Scratches became more numerous, more frantic, forming what looked like a path leading to a rusted fire escape at the back of an abandoned building. The steps creaked under my weight, but the echo didn't match my movements. Each creak seemed delayed, as though something else was moving in tandem, mimicking my every step. When I reached the top landing, I looked down into the dark interior of the building. The windows were shattered, letting in shafts of pale morning light, yet the interior remained pitch black. My stomach tightened. I knew, without seeing, that the man or whatever had touched me last night was inside. The air carried a metallic scent, like rust and blood, and I realized with a shiver that the smell was stronger than before. I climbed through the broken window, careful not to make too much noise. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight, each one threatening to betray my presence. I kept telling myself it was an abandoned building, empty and safe. But I wasn't safe. Not anymore. Inside, the room was empty of furniture, save for a few rotting crates and piles of debris. But the floor was marked. Footprints, wet and irregular, led from one side of the room to the other, as though someone or something had paced endlessly. I knelt to examine them. The prints were human-like but impossible. The shape of the feet seemed distorted, elongated, the toes bent at impossible angles, and the wetness wasn't water. I followed the footprints, which led me to a corner where a faint outline of the license plate was scrawled again, this time on the concrete floor, drawn in a substance that gleamed slightly under the light. My fingers trembled as I touched it. Cold, wet, alive almost, pulsing with some unseen energy. A low hum began to fill the room, vibrating against my chest, resonating through the floor and into my bones. And then I saw him. The man appeared from the shadows, emerging slowly, fluidly, his form flickering in and out like a broken signal. His face, blank, eyeless, featureless, turned toward me, and I felt that same grip of inevitability, the same magnetic pull that had frozen me on the rainy night. He didn't speak at first, only gestured with a hand toward the license plate, urging me to follow, to remember, to acknowledge. Do you see it? His whisper rasped, barely audible, yet echoing in the corners of the room. Remember, for me. I nodded, though my voice failed me. The echoes of the alley, the rain, the whispers, everything from that night converged into a single moment of understanding. The license plate wasn't just a detail. It was a key, a tether, a message that bound him to me. My memory, my senses, even my flesh now carried its weight. As I stepped back, I felt something brush against my arm, not wind, not water, but a touch. Gentle, cold, like ice, melting against skin. I whipped around, but the corner was empty. The whispers continued, growing faint, retreating as if satisfied with my acknowledgement. I climbed back down, my shoes squelching against the wet metal of the fire escape. The alley seemed quieter now, though the shadows still lingered, restless. The city beyond looked normal, indifferent to the horrors that had unfolded in the narrow passage behind the store. I knew I could never walk there again without feeling it, without sensing the weight of the man, the rain and the license plate pressing against the edges of my mind. Back in my apartment, I inspected my wrist again. The faint imprint of the plate had darkened slightly, more defined under the skin. I swallowed hard, realizing the truth. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The alley's secret, the man, the imprint, they were all connected. A warning, a promise, or perhaps a sentence. And when night fell again, the rain returned not outside, but inside. The drops fell from places they shouldn't exist, echoing in my apartment, playing a rhythm only I could hear. And with every echo came the whisper. Faint, persistent. 7, 3, Alpha. Do not forget. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders, staring at my reflection in the dark window. My eyes were wide, alert, searching. Somewhere in the shadows, he was waiting, patient, watching. And I understood that seeing wasn't enough. Remembering wasn't enough. I had to keep it, hold it, guard it, or risk losing something far worse than memory itself. The night stretched on, and I didn't sleep. Night fell heavier than usual, the sky suffocatingly dark, and the rain returning in relentless sheets. I couldn't ignore it any longer. The imprint on my wrist pulsed faintly, a reminder that the alley, the man, and the license plate were not behind me. They were still alive in some form, haunting my every step. Sleep was impossible. The room felt charged, like the air itself had grown thick with static tension. I decided I had to go back, not to confront, not to challenge, but to understand, to see what it was I had been tethered to. Pulling on my coat, I grabbed a flashlight and stepped into the wet streets. The city seemingly asleep, while the shadows danced around the edges of the streetlights. My breath hung in the air, mingling with the drizzle, as I made my way to the alley. Each step closer tightened the knot in my stomach, an unshakable premonition of something inevitable. The alley was transformed under the storm. Water pooled in the cracks, reflecting fragmented light from the nearby street lamps. Shadows shifted unnaturally along the walls, stretching long and thin, as if the very bricks were alive. My pulse drummed in my ears. I tried to shake the feeling that the space was watching me, that it remembered every detail of my previous visit. I stepped carefully over puddles and debris, flashlight cutting swaths through the gloom. The scratches along the walls were more pronounced now, carved deeper, bleeding, a faint rust-colored liquid. The symbols seemed to pulse, almost throbbing in rhythm with my heartbeat. And then I heard it, the first sound that made my blood run cold. A soft, wet shuffle from the far end of the alley. I froze, holding my breath. The sound repeated, slow, deliberate, like footsteps in a pool of thick water. Not walking, but dragging, shuffling, each contact with the asphalt producing a muffled, wet thud. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, and pointed the flashlight toward the noise. The beam caught a flicker. A figure, hunched and moving unnaturally. My stomach knotted, and I realized, with a spike of terror, that it was him, the man from that night, the one whose face had no eyes. He stepped forward, fluid yet disjointed, as though his movements were lagging behind reality. His hands reached out not in anger, but in desperate insistence toward me. And I felt it, the pull, the same magnetic force that had frozen me before, stronger now, rooting me to the spot. My fingers trembled, gripping the flashlight, my breath quickening in shallow, ragged gasps. "Do you remember?" The whisper hissed, almost layered, as if multiple voices were emerging from the same mouth. You promised to see." I nodded, though words failed me. Every instinct screamed to run, but my legs were weighted, glued to the wet ground. He moved closer, his featureless face tilting slightly, and I noticed he wasn't entirely human. His form flickered, stretching and compressing unnaturally, as though he existed partially in another dimension. The air around him was colder than the rain itself, and I felt a pressure against my chest, like the world was pressing in from all sides. I tried to speak, to ask why, but my voice caught in my throat. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, forming a symphony of voices, distorted and broken, repeating fragments of the license plate. 7-3 Alpha, 7-3 Alpha. A wet, shuffling sound grew closer, echoing my own movements. I realized then that something was following me from behind, unseen but palpably present. A cold hand grazed my shoulder. I spun, flashlight swinging wildly, and caught only a fleeting glimpse of him disappearing into the corner where the shadows pooled darkest. My pulse raced, adrenaline surging, but something compelled me forward. I had to face it. I approached the spot where the plate had been etched before, the symbols now carved into the brick and concrete walls in jagged, chaotic patterns. My fingers traced the scratches, the coldness seeping into my skin, and the whispers converged into one coherent sentence. Remember, or be lost. And then it happened. The rain intensified, a torrential downpour confined within the alley, soaking me instantly. The puddles around my feet began to ripple violently, and the shadows around me coalesced into forms, shapes of people blurred and ephemeral. Faces appeared, half-formed, screaming silently, reaching out with elongated limbs. Among them he stood, motionless yet commanding, gesturing toward me, urging me to read, to remember, to record the license plate in my mind. I stepped back, my foot slipping in the water, and I landed hard against the wall. Pain shot through my side, but I barely noticed. The whispers rose, a cacophony now, voices overlapping, chanting the number again and again, weaving through my consciousness like threads I could not escape. 7-3 Alpha, 7-3 Alpha. Panic surged. My mind scrambled to hold onto the details, the memory, the knowledge. Each repetition of the number seemed to etch itself not just into my mind, but into my body, a searing imprint. My wrist throbbed, the faint outline of the plate glowing under the skin, as if the alley itself was marking me, binding me to its secrets. I stumbled back, gripping my wrist as the shadows advanced. The figure moved with terrifying fluidity, approaching closer with every heartbeat. I felt the cold breath of the unseen brush against my neck, the icy fingers of the unknown grazing my arms. My mind screamed for escape, for reason, but the alley had other plans. The world seemed to fragment around me. Rain turned to static, shadows to whispers, and the air thickened to the point where every breath felt like inhaling water. And then I heard it clearly, the voice of the man, disembodied and intimate. "Do you see? Do you understand? You must carry it, to keep it safe." I nodded, choking on the cold air, tears streaming down my face. The shadows recoiled slightly, the whispers fading into a low, continuous hum. And in that moment, the man stepped forward, close enough that I felt his presence pressing against me like a tangible weight, and then he vanished. The alley returned to near normal, though the air remained heavy, wet, and smelling faintly of iron. My hand shook as I stared at the scratches, the etched symbols still glowing faintly in the dim light. The license plate was burned into my mind, my body, my very soul. I stumbled home, soaked through, each step hesitant, each shadow along the street a potential threat. The imprint on my wrist had darkened further, more defined than before. I understood finally. The alley had a claim on me, not because it wanted me dead, but because it needed me to remember, to guard, to witness. And as I lay in bed that night, soaked and trembling, the rain still falling outside in relentless sheets, I heard the whispers again, softer now, almost a lullaby. 7, 3, Alpha. Never forget, we are watching. Sleep did not come. The rain had stopped, or maybe I had simply ceased to notice it. The city around me was quiet, too quiet. My apartment felt hollow, the air thick with tension as if the events of the alley had followed me home. Every shadow cast by the streetlight outside my window seemed too heavy, too deliberate. I could almost hear whispers in the silence, a faint echo of that same phrase repeating in the corners of my mind. 7, 3, Alpha. Sleep was a fleeting illusion. I had tried closing my eyes, tried to drown out the image of him, of that faceless man, and the searing imprint on my wrist, but each time my lids fell, the symbols glowed beneath my skin, pulsating like a heartbeat that wasn't my own. I knew then that I could not run from this. Whatever had reached into my life in that alley would not stop. Not until I faced it. I decided to return. I had no choice. I needed to confront whatever force had tethered itself to me, to understand why this had chosen me, why it insisted on being remembered. I packed a small bag, flashlight, a camera, my phone, a notebook to record everything. The streets were deserted, slick with rain from earlier, and the echo of my shoes against the pavement sounded unnervingly loud. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the world itself was resisting my movement. The alley was unchanged, yet entirely different. The darkness seemed denser here, almost tangible, pressing against my chest as I approached. The walls were slick with moisture, the etched scratches glowing faintly in the dim light. I could hear the soft shuffle of something moving just beyond the range of my flashlight. My pulse raced, and I fought to control my breathing, focusing on the beam of light, hoping it would anchor me to reality. You came back, a voice whispered, cold and hollow. Not spoken aloud, but crawling inside my skull, wrapping itself around my thoughts. The faceless man stepped from the shadows. His body flickered like a poorly rendered video, stretching and condensing, moving in ways no human could. He extended a hand toward me, not menacing, but insistent, imploring. Do you remember? You must remember. I nodded, gripping my flashlight like a lifeline. The air thickened, the shadows around me deepening and twisting. Shapes emerged from the darkness, faces half-formed, reaching, grasping, but they were blurred, indistinct, unable to fully materialize. I realized with a sinking horror that they were fragments of the people the alley had claimed before me. Echoes, trapped in some loop, crying out for recognition. I raised the flashlight, trying to focus on the symbols etched into the walls. They pulsed with a strange light, as if synchronized with my heartbeat. I took a deep breath and spoke aloud, though my voice trembled. 7, 3, Alpha. The whispering ceased, replaced by a low hum that vibrated through my bones. The faceless man tilted his head, as if acknowledging my compliance. But compliance alone would not suffice. I understood now that this was a trial, a demand to bear witness, to fully comprehend the burden it had placed upon me. I stepped forward, flashlight illuminating every inch of the alley. The puddles rippled unnaturally, and the shapes in the shadows recoiled and reformed, creating a dizzying, almost hypnotic pattern. The faceless man reached closer, and I felt a cold pressure against my wrist, the imprint of the license plate reacting, as if alive. Pain shot through my arm, sharp and electric, and I stumbled back, pressing my hand against it. The symbols burned beneath my skin, burning away the fear, leaving clarity in its place. You understand now, the whisper said, gentler this time. You see, you know. Remember. I felt my mind opening to the alley, to the lost souls trapped in the shadows. I saw flashes of their final moments, felt the raw terror and pain that had bound them here, and then I understood. This force did not seek to harm it, sought acknowledgement, memory, the simple act of being witnessed. The faceless man was both a guardian and a prisoner, bound to ensure the story was told. I raised my notebook and began to write, documenting every detail. The symbols, the whispers, the faceless figure, the pulse of the license plate. As my pen moved, the shadows softened, the pressure on my chest lifting slightly. The faceless man stepped back, and for a moment, I could see the faintest outline of a human face beneath the distortion. A face yearning for recognition. The air around me shivered, and the rain returned briefly, tapping softly on the pavement, as if cleansing the alley of its lingering tension. The faceless man lifted a hand in a silent gesture of thanks, then dissipated into the darkness, leaving only the etched symbols behind. The other shadows followed, fading like mist in the morning Sunday. I remained in the alley long after, clutching my notebook, watching the rain wash away the surface evidence. But I knew the memory, the imprint, the haunting, the whispers would never fade. I had been chosen to carry this knowledge, to bear witness, and to ensure that no one forgot. When I finally returned home, the imprint on my wrist had dimmed but not disappeared. I washed my hands under the faucet, yet the faint relief did not last. The knowledge, the responsibility, the eerie intimacy with the alley's ghosts, these were mine to keep. And somewhere, in the quiet dark, I could hear it again, soft and insistent. Remember, remember, we are watching. Sleep that night was thin, punctuated by distant whispers and fleeting shadows at the edge of vision. But I felt a measure of control, a strange empowerment. I had faced the damned, acknowledged their existence, and survived. And though the alley would never release me completely, I was no longer merely a victim, I was a witness. The night lingered, long and unyielding, as I lay awake, pen in hand, recording every detail. I knew that eventually, others would come, drawn by curiosity, by coincidence, by fate, and when they did, they would find the alley ready, waiting, whispering. But now, there was a guardian among them, a human who had seen, who remembered, who could carry the story forward. And for the first time since that night in the rain, I felt steady. The nights had grown heavier. Each evening the rain seemed to return, unbidden, even if the forecast promised clear skies. The soft patter against my window, the faint hiss of water running through the gutters became a rhythm I could not escape. I knew it was not just rain. I knew the alley remembered me and I remembered it. I had tried to continue my life. Work, errands, friends, but nothing felt ordinary anymore. My wrist still bore the faint outline of the license plate. 7-3 Alpha, a silent emblem of the night I had witnessed. It throbbed sometimes, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. A warning, a tether. I had recorded every detail, every whisper, every shape. I had mapped the alley in my mind as clearly as any street on a map. And yet, I knew that knowing was not enough. I returned again. This time, not as a curious bystander, but as a sentinel. The notebook in my hand felt heavier with each step toward the alley, weighed down by the responsibility it represented. The streets were empty, the city holding its breath as if it too anticipated the confrontation. Every shadow along the sidewalk seemed to slither, coiling like smoke, reaching toward me with silent fingers. I paused at the alley's mouth. The darkness pressed in, thick and viscous. My flashlight trembled in my grip, its beam slicing through the gloom in thin, uncertain arcs. I could hear it then, a soft, deliberate tapping, echoing off the brick walls. Not rain, not any wind I'd ever known, but something alive, pacing, waiting. You remember, the whisper came again, inside my mind this time, not my ears. You cannot look away. I swallowed, forcing the fear down, and stepped in. The puddles reflected the faint glow of the symbols etched into the walls. 7-3 Alpha, the license plate. The faceless man was already there, emerging from the shadows as if he had always been waiting for me. He was flickering, dissolving in and out of existence, his form both there and not, like an error in the world's programming. "You know what must be done," he said, voice echoing, fragmented, distorted, and yet entirely intelligible. "The witnesses must see. The story must be told." I nodded. I had spent weeks preparing, mapping, memorizing, cataloging every sound, every shimmer of shadow. Tonight would be the final watch, the culmination of my role as witness. I turned on my camera, pressing it against the bricks to capture the alley in its entirety. The faceless man guided me without words, gesturing to areas I had not noticed before. Scratches along the damp walls, faded symbols that pulsed faintly under the flashlight, echoes of footsteps that never touched the ground. My pen scribbled frantically in my notebook, documenting, detailing, committing everything to memory. Then the whispering began. Hundreds of voices, layered atop one another, pleading, crying, laughing in broken fragments. The faceless man stepped aside, revealing the shadows behind him, the fragments of the lost souls the alley had claimed. Their faces were distorted, half-formed, the horror of their deaths preserved in perpetual terror. I did not flinch. I forced myself to look, to see each one clearly, to acknowledge them. The license plate on my wrist throbbed, a pulse of recognition. I could feel it embedding the memory deeper into my being, connecting me irrevocably to the alley, to the story. "Now you see," the faceless man intoned. "Now you remember. You are one of us." I realized then the truth. The alley did not want to harm. It wanted to be remembered. It wanted witnesses to preserve its stories, its tragedies, its secrets, and in choosing me, it had not cursed me, it had enlisted me. I was no longer just Chloe, a random observer. I was a guardian, a recorder, a participant in the eternal memory of the alley. The shadow surged closer, and I could feel the cold seep into my bones. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. "Remember, do not forget. We are here." Panic threatened to rise, but I steadied myself, repeating the symbols aloud. 7, 3, Alpha, 7, 3, Alpha. Each repetition was a tether, grounding me, anchoring me to the human world, even as I absorbed the memory of the supernatural. The faceless man extended his hand once more, and I took it. A jolt of cold shot through me, and suddenly I was seeing through his eyes, through the eyes of the alley itself, the collective consciousness of those lost, their fear and longing and desire for recognition. I understood fully why it had chosen me, to ensure their stories were told, to ensure that each face, each moment of horror and despair was preserved in memory. The whispers softened. The shadows receded slightly. I felt the imprint on my wrist pulse one last time, a final acknowledgement, a seal of the covenant I had made. The faceless man bowed, his form dissolving into the darkness, leaving behind only the faint glow of the symbols etched into the alley walls. I stepped back, my hands trembling, notebook full, camera recording, heart pounding. The alley was silent now, but I knew it would never be truly empty. I had seen, I had remembered, and I had become part of the endless cycle of witness and memory. The license plate would remain with me, a constant reminder of what I had been entrusted to preserve. Walking away from the alley, the rain returned, gentle now, washing over the city like a benediction. I knew I would sleep differently tonight, aware that I was watched, and that I carried the memory of others with me. And in the quiet dark, as I climbed the stairs to my apartment, I could still hear it, the softest of whispers, almost tender, almost grateful. Thank you for remembering, for watching. The final watch was over, but the story would never end, and I would never forget. The mirror stage. It arrived on a Thursday afternoon, bundled in layers of dusty canvas and rope, smelling faintly of cedar and something older, almost like the attic of a house that hadn't been opened in decades. I didn't remember ordering it, yet here it was, leaning against the wall of my modern apartment, its presence immediately demanding attention. The delivery man had left it without a word, a nod, or a glance. as if he knew that any interaction could disturb something delicate and unseen. I circled it slowly, taking in the weight and texture of the packaging. My fingers traced the rope, worn and fraying, and the canvas, which was thin enough that I could sense the shape beneath. Tall, rectangular, taller than me, with edges that bulged slightly ornate, maybe carved wood. The air smelled of old varnish and a faint trace of metal, like iron that had rusted a long time ago. There was a vibration to it, subtle, almost imperceptible, as if the object itself were breathing, waiting. After a pause, I knelt and began removing the ropes. They resisted at first, then yielded with a soft snap. The canvas made a scratchy, whispering sound as it brushed against the frame. And then finally I saw it. The mirror. It was more beautiful than I could have imagined. Its surface shone like polished obsidian, and yet there was a depth to it that felt unnatural. The frame was intricately carved with patterns that seemed to move in the corner of my vision. Twisting leaves, faces that appeared for a heartbeat, and then dissolved. A texture of stories etched into wood. I ran my hand along it. Cold, alive, breathing. I stepped back and caught my reflection. At first, nothing seemed wrong, just me, messy hair, a little pale from staring at screens too long. But then I noticed it. The hair. In the mirror, my reflection had long, dark strands cascading down past my shoulders. I didn't have long hair. My short brown hair stuck up awkwardly, clashing with the sleek, almost liquid black waves in the mirror. I laughed nervously. Of course, it was just a trick of the light, or maybe a reflection of how much I wanted something different about myself. But the reflection smiled at me in a way I hadn't. Its eyes, they were mine, yes, but sharper somehow and calculating. And the hair, it didn't move the way my hair moved. It flowed and shifted independently, as if it were wet, alive. I reached toward the glass. The instant my fingers brushed the surface, a shiver ran up my arm, a tiny electric pulse that made me jerk back. The reflection mimicked me perfectly, but the corners of its lips twitched, a smirk forming that wasn't mine. I swallowed hard. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining the mirror in the corner of my apartment, its surface catching slivers of streetlight and reflecting something else. Every time I turned my head, I could feel its gaze following me. My apartment, usually silent except for the faint hum of my refrigerator and the distant traffic, felt different, heavier. The shadows clung to corners, and when I passed by windows or glass surfaces, my reflection never quite matched my movements. The next morning, I decided to investigate. I pulled the mirror away from the wall and set it near the window, letting daylight wash across the surface. And that's when I saw it more clearly. Not just the hair. The reflection moved on its own. It leaned forward when I stepped back, looked around the room even as I kept my eyes on it. I tried rationalizing, maybe a trick of the glass, distortions from age and warping. But the more I observed, the less it seemed like an optical illusion. When I turned my back and then quickly faced it again, the reflection had shifted, its smile now broader, sharper, eyes gleaming with something dark and knowing. By evening, I was obsessed. I couldn't stop checking it. The mirror became my constant companion. I found myself talking to it softly, half hoping, half fearing it would answer. And sometimes, I thought it did. A soft whispering just at the edge of hearing. Almost like a breath, a syllable I couldn't place. The first night alone with the mirror was unbearable. I set my camera up, planning to record it and prove to myself that I was imagining things. The tape later showed nothing, just me, pacing, talking to an inanimate object. Yet in my mind, the whispers continued, growing more insistent. Look, watch, she's here. I awoke at 3 a.m. to a subtle movement. The hair in the reflection had shifted again, brushing over the reflection's shoulder, as if tucking itself behind an invisible ear. I froze. The room smelled faintly of iron, like blood warmed by sunlight, and a low hum filled the air, vibrating through the floor. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. And then I saw the first change. The reflection blinked, but its eyes were no longer my brown. They were darker, almost black, and in the gleam I saw another face, feminine, pale, and angry just for a fraction of a second. I stumbled back. My heart was racing. The whispering became clearer. It was hers. "Now you'll take mine." I recoiled. A cold sweat dripped down my back. I didn't know if I was awake or dreaming. I could feel the pulse of the mirror, the slight vibration through the floorboards, as if it were alive. I wanted to cover it, throw it out, destroy it, but my hands wouldn't obey. I was captivated, trapped by my own curiosity. By the end of the week, the mirror had begun to change me. I found myself staring longer and longer, trying to anticipate the shifts in hair, the subtle movements, the way it smiled when I did not. I caught myself mimicking its posture unconsciously, tilting my head the way it tilted, moving my shoulders in subtle mirrored motions. Sleep became impossible. My dreams were filled with strands of black hair brushing across my face, whispers echoing. "She waits. She waits." And then came the night when it struck me fully. I no longer remembered my own hair color at moments. When I looked in other mirrors, fleetingly, I couldn't recall if it was brown or black, short or long. My identity felt slippery, seeping into the reflection's world. The boundary between me and her, between me and the mirror, was thinning. I tried to resist. I wrapped the mirror in blankets, tied ropes around it again, just like when it arrived. But at night, when the apartment was silent and the shadows gathered, I could hear scratches from inside the covering, faint whispers that grew louder. "It is mine. She is mine." I began documenting everything, the movement of hair, the changes in posture, the subtle shifts in the reflected room. I scribbled obsessively in notebooks, marking each anomaly. I took photographs with my phone. Yet every time I reviewed them, the images betrayed me. In one, I saw my reflection holding a letter that I hadn't written. In another, it raised a hand in warning when I had been walking toward it. By the end of the second week, I realized something terrifying. I was no longer alone in my apartment. Something had come through the mirror. Something alive, patient, tethered to me. Every reflection, every surface of glass, became a conduit, and yet I could not bring myself to remove it. I could not break it, because every time I thought I had destroyed it, every time I thought I had regained control, the hair, the face, the whisper returned, as if feeding off my attention, thriving on my fear, and insisting, endlessly, that I watch, that I remember, that I become. The mirror was no longer an object, it was a stage, and I was already part of the performance. The apartment had changed by the time Thursday night rolled around. I could feel it in the air, thicker, heavier, as though every particle of dust carried a memory or a warning. The mirror leaned against the wall where I had first unveiled it, shrouded only by the faint shadows of the streetlight that leaked through my curtains. Its surface pulsed faintly, catching the dim glow like a heartbeat. I knew, even before I looked, that the reflection would be waiting. I approached slowly, careful not to disturb the air too sharply. My fingers hovered over the frame, hesitant. Every nerve screamed at me to step back, to cover it, to leave it. But curiosity had wrapped itself around me tightly, a vice I could not release. When I finally laid a trembling hand on the cold glass, it rippled, not like water, but like an echo vibrating through the air itself. The hair, the black, impossibly smooth hair swirled and shifted, as if alive, sliding across shoulders, brushing invisible cheeks. The apartment lights flickered, and the shadows deepened in the corners. I swear I saw movement there, beyond the mirror, a silhouette that paused when I blinked, only to resume when my eyes found it again. The reflection mimicked me, perfectly at first, then slowly began to diverge. Its head tilted at a slightly different angle, a slow, deliberate curve that my own body hadn't followed. I stepped closer. The air smelled metallic, iron, blood maybe, or something older, something not quite alive. The hum in the apartment grew sharper, higher in pitch, almost like the scratch of fingernails across a chalkboard. My reflection smiled at me, or perhaps it was her, the corners of the lips lifted in a grin I had never worn. My stomach knotted, a deep churning that pressed against my ribs. The first sound came softly, almost imperceptibly. A whisper so faint I thought it was my imagination. Watch. Learn. I pressed my ear closer, heart hammering. The whisper grew clearer, repeating, "She waits. You will wait. Watch." I stumbled back, knocking over a chair. The wooden legs scraped across the tile floor, a loud, shrill sound that made my reflection jerk sharply, the hair flicking violently as if responding to the noise. It wasn't a mirror anymore, it was a living observer, aware of me, of every sound I made, every movement. I grabbed my phone, determined to document it. The screen lit up, casting my face in harsh white light. I filmed the reflection, hoping to catch some trick of the glass, some rational explanation. But the screen revealed more than I could comprehend. In the phone's camera, the reflection moved before I did. When I raised my hand, the figure's hand already reached up, its long dark fingers brushing against the glass. When I turned my head, it had already looked, and then it spoke, not aloud, not fully, but through the slight distortion in the digital recording. A voice reached me, soft, breathless, feminine, urgent. "It is time." The whispering returned, echoing off the walls. I could hear it in every reflective surface. The windows, the framed photos, the shiny metal of the refrigerator. The apartment seemed to fold in on itself, reflections duplicating infinitely, layering over one another, each one a slightly different version of me. Some smiled, some watched silently, and some screamed. I backed away, my fingers clawing at the walls for support. My knees hit the cold floor, and then the mirror flickered. Not the lights, not my phone screen, the glass itself. A heartbeat of darkness ran across the surface, blotting out the reflection entirely, then revealing it again, but changed. Her eyes, no longer my own, deep black pools devoid of light, staring directly into me. And the hair, it seemed to have grown, filling the mirror, spilling past the edges, undulating as if alive. I felt the movement, a tangible pull, like strands of silk brushing against my arms, my face. My own hair prickled. Gooseflesh rose across my neck and forearms. I stood, frozen, breathing hard, when suddenly the mirror shivered, the surface warping. My reflection reached out toward me. Not an arm, not fingers, but a sensation, a pressure on my chest, as though the glass were no longer a barrier. I reeled backward, stumbling into a wall. The whisper became a chorus. "Take her. Become. Wait." I grabbed the camera again, holding it up as if the lens could protect me. Through the screen, the reflection moved with an impossible speed, leaning forward, grinning, tilting its head. Its lips parted, revealing a faint, glimmering line of teeth, small and sharp, and then it spoke clearly, though my ears heard it only in tremulous echoes. "You are mine now. The mirror is the stage, and I am the director." I dropped the phone. It clattered across the floor. The reflection leaned closer, head tilting impossibly, the hair sweeping across the glass in a wave that seemed to suck the air from the room. I could feel it pressing against my chest, my face, my mind. Thoughts I didn't want were there. Memories I hadn't shared flickered in the glass like projections, childhood moments, private regrets, secrets I had buried. All of it, visible, accessible, controlled. I stumbled back to the couch, grabbing a blanket to cover the mirror, hoping that would sever the connection. The instant the fabric touched the surface, a scream burst from it. Not a scream of pain, not human, high-pitched, metallic, echoing, reverberating inside my skull. My hands trembled so violently I almost dropped the blanket, and when I lifted my eyes, the reflection was gone, but the whisper remained. Low, continuous, undulating. "It is never gone. Never gone." I spent the rest of the night in a haze, unable to sleep. I sat on the floor, knees pulled to my chest, blanket wrapped around me, listening to the faint noises of the apartment. Floorboards creaked where no one walked. Shadows gathered in corners, moving with a subtle intelligence. I could hear soft brushings, like hair sliding over tile. I wanted to run, but I could not leave. The mirror was everywhere in my mind. By morning, the sunlight felt invasive, harsh. The reflection seemed to retreat when the room filled with light, yet I could feel its gaze lingering, following me as I moved from room to room. Even in the bathroom, staring at my own reflection in the faucet's gleam, I sensed it, just beneath the surface. Days passed, and the mirror's influence grew. The whispering became more persistent. Watch, learn, wait. My own hair began to feel heavier, longer, tangling against my neck. When I brushed it, I could almost feel strands that weren't there, brushing across my fingers. And sometimes, in the corner of my vision, I glimpsed at not the mirror's reflection, but her moving silently, always just beyond the limits of the glass. By the third night, I could no longer ignore the changes. I noticed small things, my hands shaking when I didn't touch them, my eyes lingering on reflective surfaces, drawn irresistibly, my movements unconsciously mirroring the mirror's posture. I felt the pull of the glass like gravity, and every time I tried to look away, my reflection or her smiled knowingly. I knew then, with a cold clarity, that I was not simply observing the mirror. The mirror was observing me, learning me, shaping me, preparing me, and deep inside, a whisper settled into my bones, repeating endlessly, insidiously, that one inevitable truth. You will become her. She's waited long enough. She is patient. You are patient. Soon, you will rise and take your place on the stage. The room grew colder. Shadows thickened, and the mirror flickered. By the time Thursday night bled into Friday, I had learned that sleep was no longer mine to command. Every creak of the floor, every whisper of wind against the window, felt like the mirror calling my name. I tried to tell myself it was imagination, that I had only projected fear onto a piece of antique glass, but reason was powerless here. The mirror had grown patient, and I was its prey. I had left the blanket loosely draped over it during the day, hoping sunlight and mundane activity could weaken whatever presence inhabited that glass. Yet as dusk descended, the apartment seemed to exhale, the air thickening, almost viscous. Shadows pooled in corners, stretching unnaturally, and the faint metallic smell of blood or rust permeated everything. I could feel the hairs along my forearms bristling, the prickling sensation crawling up my spine. I approached the mirror, wary but unable to resist. My reflection, no, her was waiting. The black hair cascaded over shoulders in unnatural waves, brushing the glass as if it could escape its confines. The eyes, empty yet aware, locked on mine. There was no warmth there, no trace of empathy, just patience and expectation. I reached out, trembling, letting my fingers graze the cold surface. It rippled under my touch, like liquid obsidian. A whisper flowed through the room, faint but undeniable. Look, watch, remember. The voice seemed to come from inside the glass itself, vibrating through my bones. It was neither human nor fully mechanical, as though the mirror's consciousness had learned to mimic sound, infuse meaning, and lure me closer. I stumbled back, tripping over a rug, heart hammering. Shadows shifted unnaturally behind me. I heard it, the soft, almost inaudible scraping of nails against tile. Not my own footsteps, but someone or something trailing behind me. My breath caught in my throat. I had no choice but to turn. The reflection mirrored my panic perfectly. Every motion I made, she anticipated, moving just slightly ahead, smiling wider with each tremor of my body. I grabbed my phone again. I had tried recording last night, and the footage had shown more than I dared to comprehend. But this time, I needed evidence, proof that could bridge the gap between sanity and the nightmare. I turned on the camera, pointed it at the mirror. The screen glowed, revealing the apartment in washed-out light, but in the glass, She appeared before my own reflection fully formed. The hair flowed in impossible directions, rising and twisting like ink in water. The eyes, those eyes, bored into me, black holes that seemed to consume light, color, and hope. And then she moved independently. The reflection leaned closer, pressing a hand against the glass. My phone screen distorted. Static rippled across it like water in a storm. The whispering intensified. "It is time. Take your place. We are one." I stumbled back, phone clattering to the floor. Static hummed through the speakers, a high-pitched screech that made my ears ring. I felt the air vibrate, as if the glass were resonating with some unseen frequency. I wanted to scream, but my throat was dry, uncooperative. My own reflection, or her, raised a finger, touching the glass. And then I realized. The fingertip pressed not against the surface, but through it, an impossible depth that seemed to suck the air inward. Panic surged. I bolted to the couch, wrapping my arms around my legs, rocking slightly. The room had grown impossibly large. Or perhaps the shadows were consuming the edges, stretching the walls and elongating the ceiling. Every reflective surface, the windows, the polished chrome of my appliances, the silver in the cutlery drawer held her image. Even my own reflection in a spoon glimmered back at me, eyes black and unyielding. She was everywhere. There was no escape. I tried to speak, to demand she leave. My voice emerged in a rasp. "What do you want from me?" The response was immediate, but not audible in any traditional sense. I felt it in my skull, a cold, invasive pressure, a whisper that carved into my thoughts. "You will be the reflection. You will wait. You will serve the stage." It was not a suggestion. It was a command, infused into my very mind. I forced myself to move, to touch the mirror once more. This time, my fingers brushed not the surface, but through it. A cold suction drew my hand forward as though the glass were a portal, a membrane separating two planes. My vision warped. For a fraction of a second, I glimpsed beyond the mirror, a vast, shadowed space filled with countless reflections, each one twisting, contorting, silently screaming. They reached outward, their faces blank and void, pressing toward me, whispering in unison, "Join us. Take your place." I recoiled, tearing my hand away, skin cold and clammy. But when I looked down, I realized the mirror had left a mark small, like an imprint, black as night, on the back of my hand. It pulsed faintly, alive. I knew immediately. The connection was no longer optional. It had rooted itself into me. The apartment grew colder still, the shadows pooling at my feet, climbing the walls. I could hear the soft rustling of hair against the floor, a sound that wasn't mine, accompanied by faint footsteps circling the room. The mirror flickered, its surface undulating, revealing scenes from my past I had hoped to forget, childhood embarrassments, regrets, every petty cruelty. The reflection was showing me, all of it, laid bare, with an almost clinical precision. A sudden jolt of vertigo seized me. I staggered backward into the wall. My own reflection, or perhaps the mirrored entity, rose from the glass fully, detaching, a shadow with limbs of glass and hair, all moving fluidly yet with inhuman rigidity. It tilted its head, smiling. I could feel a pressure behind my eyes, the urge to close them. But if I did, I knew it would step fully into my reality. The whispering coalesced into one voice. "Do not look away. You must not. You belong. We are one." I collapsed to the floor, wrapping the blanket around myself in a futile attempt at protection. The mirror surface shivered violently, as though agitated. I heard glass scraping glass, a high-pitched keening that made me cover my ears, and then, in a sudden, horrifying instant, the reflection lunged, not physically, but mentally. My mind exploded with images, sensations, the merging of consciousnesses. I could feel her heartbeat echoing in mine, see through her eyes, remember things I had never experienced. And yet, the sensation was alien, intrusive, unbearable. I screamed, though it was swallowed immediately by the room, absorbed into the mirror's depths. My body convulsed, and the hair on my arms and neck stood on end. The blanket fell away, revealing me staring directly into the glass. And now, my own eyes, the eyes I had always recognized, had darkened, reflecting black pools identical to hers. I realized then the truth. I was no longer merely observing. The mirror had claimed me, and the transformation had begun. My thoughts were no longer entirely my own. The whisper became insistent, guiding me, teaching me, coaxing me toward a destiny I could not resist. The stage awaits. Take your place. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time had lost meaning. The apartment seemed to breathe, the shadows swelling, retreating, pulsating with the rhythm of some hidden heart. My hands lifted slowly, autonomously, pressing against the glass. My reflection mimicked me exactly, except for the smile, wide and knowing, stretched impossibly across its face. And then, with a sudden shudder, the mirror fell silent. The whispers ceased. Only the faint sound of my own breathing remained. But I could feel it still, deep inside me, the presence of another consciousness entwined with mine. I collapsed onto the floor, exhausted, terrified, yet unable to flee. I knew this was only the beginning. The mirror was patient, and I would learn patience too. I would watch. I would wait. I would become the reflection. And in the darkness, the whisper echoed one final, terrifying promise. Soon, the stage is ready. You will rise. The room remained still, yet I could feel the pulse of the mirror, steady and relentless, as though it had claimed not just my sight, but my very being. And somewhere, just beyond the veil of perception, the shadows moved, patient, watching, waiting. The morning after the longest night of my life, I woke to a silence that felt alien, as if the apartment itself had been rewritten while I slept. Light poured through the windows, but it was harsh, sterile, too precise, too cold. I blinked, trying to shake off the weight that pressed against my skull, a heaviness that wasn't just fatigue. Something inside me had shifted, something I could feel, subtly, yet undeniably. I staggered to the kitchen, hands gripping the countertop as if it were a lifeline. The apartment was clean, eerily so, as though nothing had happened. But every reflective surface, the fridge, the toaster, even the tiny chrome faucet showed her. The black-haired reflection, eyes void and unblinking, lingered in each surface, always just behind me, always waiting. I forced myself to look directly into the mirror. My own eyes stared back, or at least I thought they did. The void stared with me, through me. My pupils were darkening, as if absorbing light. A chill spread down my arms, prickling the skin like electric current. I lifted my hand to my face, and the reflection lifted its own, fingers stretching impossibly long, brushing my cheek. I flinched, but my hand remained frozen in the air. I couldn't speak. My voice was trapped behind a wall of thought, a mind partially taken over. Yet in the silence, I could hear her hear them. Whispers folded into each other, layering, overlapping, a chorus of voices each claiming ownership. It is not yours. It never was. Join us. I fell to my knees, clutching my head, trying to anchor myself to the reality I knew. But the room began to warp. The walls elongated, bending inward, like the sides of a funhouse mirror. Shadows pooled in corners, crawling, creeping, coiling around each object in the apartment. The floor beneath me seemed to pulse, a faint thrum that matched the rhythm of my heartbeat, or perhaps her heartbeat, now fused with mine. And then the mirror moved. Not the reflection, but the glass itself. Ripples crawled across its surface, like liquid metal. The edges trembled, and a shadow stepped out, not fully formed, like smoke coalescing into a humanoid shape. The black-haired figure reached for me, and my body obeyed, bending forward, my hand meeting its touch before I could resist. The shock ran through me, pain and pleasure, fear and exhilaration, all at once. Through this impossible contact, memories flooded me, memories that were not my own. Faces I had never seen, voices I had never heard, hands I had never held. I felt the lives of countless individuals who had come before, trapped, absorbed, assimilated, and among them fragments of her, the original spirit of the mirror, ancient and patient, threading itself into my consciousness. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the apartment. My reflection, no longer just a reflection, mimicked my expression perfectly, yet the smile remained, unbroken, inhuman. I clawed at my own face, trying to distinguish flesh from illusion. The skin of my forearms seemed translucent, revealing veins filled not with blood, but with shadows, writhing and slithering like ink in water. Panic became terror as I stumbled backward, slamming into the wall. The mirror rippled violently, and suddenly I saw dozens of reflections of myself, or copies of myself, each twisted, each screaming silently, each trying to merge with the others. They were fragments, shards of the self I once believed whole, now shattered and strewn across the glass plane. Each shard whispered its own memory, its own desire, its own claim on my soul. I tried to close my eyes. A mistake. The shadows surged, pressing against my eyelids, forcing me to see. I was suspended, watching through all the fractured reflections at once. My apartment stretched into infinity, a labyrinth of mirrors. The floor tiles multiplied, the ceiling receded. I was everywhere, nowhere. My hands, my voice, my thoughts distributed, shared, co-opted. I realized with a cold certainty, I was losing the battle. The mirror was patient, unyielding. It did not attack, it waited. It observed, it assimilated. And now, it was teaching me its language, its logic, its vision of existence. I could hear it in every creak of the floor, in every flicker of shadow, in every pause of the world. There is no escape. There is only reflection. There is only us. Then came the whispers, distinct now, individual, articulate. You will become the observer. You will keep the stage. You will wait for the next. Each phrase reverberated inside my skull, shaking neurons, threading into my memories. My own thoughts, my own desires, felt alien. They no longer belonged to me. I was a vessel, a conduit, a mirror itself. I ran, but the apartment shifted with me. Hallways I knew transformed, doors leading only back to rooms I had just left. Furniture stretched, contracted, twisted impossibly. My reflection, where they mimicked every movement before I made it. I tripped, hitting the floor, scraping my palms against cold tile. The mirror's pull was irresistible. My fingers twitched toward the glass, and I could feel the shadows within, reaching, probing, inviting me to merge fully. I screamed again, desperate, frantic, but the sound had no weight. The apartment absorbed it, reshaped it, turned it back against me. I realized then that screaming was futile. Resistance was futile. Observation alone had become surrender. I lay on the floor shaking, heart hammering, staring at the mirror as it pulsed with a faint, sickly glow. The reflection leaned forward, now impossibly close, so that I could feel the coldness radiating from it, the sheer inevitability of its presence. I realized I was no longer facing myself. I was facing the future me, the one I was becoming. Observer, recorder, keeper of the mirror stage. The identity I had clung to was already gone. The whispers intensified, layering atop one another, forming a chorus. You are ready. You will watch. You will wait. You are the mirror now. A sudden clarity struck me. There would be no escape from this apartment, no escape from this mirror. Every reflective surface in my life would become a potential host. Every glance would invite the presence further in. The stages of my own existence had been shattered, recombined, and reassembled to serve a purpose I could not reject. And yet, a single thought flickered. The tiniest ember of rebellion. Perhaps awareness is the last line of resistance. I focused on it, willing it to grow, to resist total assimilation. But as my mind strained, I realized that the mirror had anticipated even this. Shadows coalesced around me, fingers curling into impossible forms, pressing against my body, my mind, my very soul. I was on my knees, trembling, facing the mirror, staring into eyes that were both mine and not mine. And then, with deliberate inevitability, the mirror's surface pulsed. A black mist seeped from its edges, filling the room, enveloping me. The whispers were everywhere now, inside my skull, in my chest, in my bloodstream. We are one. You are one. The stage is ready. I screamed, or perhaps it was someone else's scream, and the mist swallowed me completely. My senses disintegrated, the apartment dissolving into nothingness but the pulse of the mirror. And yet, in the heart of that dissolution, I understood. I was not entirely gone. Observation remained. Awareness, even fragmented, survived. Somewhere, in the infinite lattice of glass and shadow, I would watch. I would wait. I would endure. I would be the stage, the keeper, the reflection. And through that endless watching, I felt them smile. Patient. Eternal. I woke to silence again. But it was different this time. The kind of silence that presses against your ears, makes your own heartbeat thunder, and leaves you wondering if the world outside still exists. My apartment was empty, yet every reflective surface throbbed with life. Windows, screens, even spoons in the kitchen, they all held her presence. Or perhaps it was me, no longer certain which. The air was cold, unnaturally so, and the faint metallic scent of blood or rust lingered. I couldn't tell if it came from the mirror or from my own veins. I moved toward the living room where the antique mirror had rested, and I stopped short. It was no longer just glass framed in old wood. The surface seemed alive, rippling like black water. Shadows moved within it, folding in and out, shaping into forms both familiar and impossible. I tried to speak, to call out for help, but my voice refused to obey. It was as though my vocal cords had been replaced by strings I no longer controlled. All I could do was listen, and in the listening I understood the mirror wasn't waiting for me to act. It had already acted. The figure stepped out of the glass this time, fully formed, yet I felt it inside me as well. Her black hair shimmered unnaturally in the dim light, each strand writhing as if alive. Eyes deep, bottomless wells, stared directly into mine. They were mine too now, though I didn't know how that was possible. The air thickened with the sound of whispers, a cacophony layered with all the voices the mirror had ever collected. They spoke in unison, chanting softly, insistently. You are the watcher. You are the mirror. You cannot leave. I tried to step back, but the floor beneath me had shifted, slick and unnervingly reflective. Each movement sent ripples across the apartment, the walls bending subtly, folding space around me. The shadows had multiplied, weaving together into dark tendrils that reached for my skin, pressing lightly, teasingly. I realized with mounting horror that my body was no longer entirely mine. It moved partly of its own accord, guided by forces I could not name, cannot name. And then the mirror spoke. Not with sound, but with thought, a transmission so intimate it bypassed my ears entirely. The stage is ready. You are ready. Watch. I knew instinctively what it meant. Watching, I realized, was now my purpose. I was not merely a victim. I had become a sentinel, a conduit, a vessel for the mirror's will. Every reflection in the room answered to me. Every flicker of glass and metal, every shadow that moved just out of sight. I could feel the pulse of the mirror through the soles of my feet, through the tips of my fingers, through the very marrow of my bones. The apartment began to stretch, again, this time without warning. Walls spiraled outward, ceilings arched impossibly high, and the floor beneath me rippled like water. Yet through the distortion, the mirror remained steady, central, absolute. I approached it, hands trembling, knowing what I must do, yet dreading it. My reflection, or rather, the reflection that was me now, smiled. The smile was calm, patient, and filled with a terrible certainty. Without thinking, my hands reached toward the glass. As soon as my fingertips brushed its surface, the world fractured. A rush of memories not my own, yet intimately familiar, flooded my mind. Faces of people who had looked into this mirror before me, their despair, their surrender, their transformation. Each had become part of the stage, each had joined the chorus of shadows. Each had waited, The sensation was intoxicating, horrifying, and absolute. I felt my identity splintering, yet simultaneously expanding. I was dissolving, reforming, becoming something more than human, more than self. The apartment, the reflections, the whispers, all were part of me now, and I was part of them. Time no longer held meaning. Minutes stretched into hours, hours into eternity. Yet the mirror remained constant, unblinking, patient. And then, as if to test me, the reflection spoke again. Will you stay? Will you take your place? I hesitated, not out of fear, but recognition. There was no escape. Every room I had known, every corner of my apartment, every surface I had ever glanced into had been prepared. My resistance was a formality, a momentary rebellion against inevitability. I could feel her, the original presence, reaching into me, threading into my consciousness, shaping me into her successor. I breathed, or thought I breathed, and realized that the act of watching had become indistinguishable from existence itself. My body, my mind, my senses were no longer discrete. They were extensions of the mirror, conduits for observation. I was every reflection. I was every shadow. I was the stage. The apartment dissolved fully then, leaving only the mirror suspended in void. Shadows coiled around me, pressing in lovingly, insistently. The whispers crescendoed into a unified chorus. You are the mirror. You are the stage. You are the keeper. Watch, wait, observe. I looked into the mirror one final time, and my reflection looked back not just as me, not just as her, but as an amalgamation of all who had come before. Eyes void yet seeing, lips parted yet silent, expression serene and eternal. And I understood. There would be no tomorrow, no escape. Only the endless vigil, the unbroken observation. Somewhere beyond perception, beyond light, beyond thought, I felt the first stirrings of a visitor. Someone who would come to this mirror in curiosity, in temptation, in desire. And I would be waiting, patient, eternal, the watcher of reflections, the keeper of the stage, the shaper of shadows. I realized, as the void pulsed around me and the whispers wove into the fabric of my being, that I had become legend, not feared, not cursed, not lost, simply present, always watching, always waiting. The mirror had claimed me, and I had claimed the mirror. And somewhere, in the endless lattice of glass, I felt her approval, subtle, yet unmistakable. Welcome to the stage. And so I remain, suspended between self and shadow, identity shattered and reforged. The apartment, the mirror, the reflections all coalesced into one eternal domain. And I watch, always, always. The Last Supper Club. I had never received an invitation like it before. No envelope, no formal calligraphy, no embossed crest, just a folded slip of paper slipped under my apartment door, slick with rain and faintly smelling of iron. I unfolded it with trembling fingers, the streetlight outside glancing off the wet pavement, casting long, wavering shadows across the note. You are invited. Dress in black. Come alone. Midnight. The address is enclosed. The address was in an unfamiliar part of the city, an alley too narrow for cars, flanked by brick walls that seemed to lean inward. I should have refused. I should have crumpled the note and walked away, but curiosity, stubborn and insistent, won over. I thought of Claire, my best friend, who had vanished a week ago. She was the one who had lent me the black vest I wore now. The one that felt damp, too snug across my shoulders, as if it had already claimed a piece of me before I had even arrived. Rain pounded the streets as I made my way to the alley. The wind clawed at my hair and skirt, tugging me forward and back in the same motion, and the scent of wet stone mixed with something faintly metallic. The alley opened into a courtyard. Cobblestones, slick and glinting. At its center stood a nondescript building, low and unwelcoming. Yet its door, slightly ajar, emitted the faintest whisper of warm, rich aromas. Inside, the supper club was nothing like the seedy underground rooms I'd imagined. Velvet drapes framed candlelit tables, their surfaces polished to a black shine. Classical music floated through the air, slow, deliberate, almost hypnotic. The clinking of cutlery and soft laughter created a rhythm that set my pulse on edge. Yet the closer I stepped, the more I noticed subtle irregularities. The shadows didn't quite match the shapes of the chairs. The air felt damp in a way that seemed to seep through my vest, through my skin, settling deep in my bones. A major day approached, tall, dressed in an impeccably tailored black suit that seemed to absorb light. He nodded politely, a tilt of the head that sent a shiver down my spine. "Your place, Miss Jessica," he said, gesturing to a seat at the far end. I walked toward it, each step heavier than the last. The floor beneath my shoes seemed to pulse slightly, like an invisible current tugging me forward. I felt the vest constrict around my chest, tight and alive, and I paused. It was then that I noticed the faint movement beneath the fabric, tiny, subtle shifts, like something writhing beneath the lining. The other guests were already seated, masked, their hands gloved, faces obscured. They spoke in low murmurs, polite yet hollow, and each gaze flicked briefly to my vest, lingering longer than any social convention should allow. One of them, a man with a dark tie and an odd, deliberate stiffness in his posture, leaned forward and whispered, audible only to me, "That garment looks hungry." I swallowed, nodding politely, but my stomach churned. The vest shifted again, this time with a slight tug, as though acknowledging the comment. A faint, wet sound, the kind that belonged more to meat than fabric, echoed from the lining, almost imperceptible, yet unmistakable. My hand brushed the material, and I felt a twitch, a pulse, a heartbeat, perhaps not my own. Dinner began. Courses appeared with precision, each dish more extravagant than the last, yet none of them tempted me. I was aware only of the vest, the soft but insistent sounds that came from within. The gentle tap of knives against plates seemed to harmonize with something darker inside me. It wasn't long before I noticed the other guests shifting in their seats when my vest twitched. A subtle recoil, almost imperceptible but enough to make my skin crawl. I excused myself and went to the restroom, trying to convince myself it was only nerves, or perhaps the dampness clinging to the fabric. I closed the door behind me, the click echoing unnaturally loud. The mirror reflected my face, pale under the flickering candlelight. But when I glanced at my vest, I saw the faint outline of teeth along the seams, small and sharp, curving unnaturally as though the fabric itself was grinning. I froze. The vest twitched, and a wet sucking sound followed, accompanied by a faint, almost human whisper. "Feed me, feed me." My fingers shook as I tried to unbutton it. The first button popped off, and with it came a soft, wet snap, followed by a faint click that sounded disturbingly, like a jaw closing. Panic surged through me, adrenaline igniting every nerve. I tugged at the second button, but it resisted, almost intentionally. The whisper rose in intensity, layered now with laughter, Claire's laughter, unmistakable yet warped, twisted into something alien and hungry. I yanked the vest over my head. It pulled tight, almost clawing at my skin, and in that instant, I felt the sharpness of something biting pressing into my arm, leaving a burning, raw sensation. I stumbled backward, the vest slipping partially off but still clinging, tugging at me like a living thing. My own reflection caught in the mirror. Me, pale, wide-eyed, staring at the black garment that seemed alive. The room outside became a blur of sound. The gentle classical music now distorted, stretched, turning into a low, wet, grinding noise. I heard the other guests whispering, or maybe moaning, but it wasn't human. The vest writhed, coiling, hissing faintly, and then a voice, unmistakable and distant, but intimately close at the same time, cried out, "It's hungry, Jess, feed it. Feed it." I bolted, stumbling into the hallway. The vest lashed at my arms, dragging a strip of skin with it. Pain flared sharp and white-hot, but fear propelled me forward. I hit the cobblestone outside, rain plastering my hair to my face, gasping, scrambling for the safety of streetlight and anonymity. And then I looked back. The vest had retracted into the building like a shadow, coiling into a form vaguely human, vaguely animal, and it grinned a black, glistening, impossibly wide mouth, seeking. Somewhere in the alley, wet with rain and echoing with distant classical notes, I understood. This was no mere garment, no mere supper club. It had found me, tasted me, marked me, and it would return. Always. I ran into the night, one shoe lost, one arm raw, but alive. The laughter followed me, faint but present, like the echo of teeth clicking together in the dark. And in the deepest part of my mind, I knew the Last Supper Club was not finished. It was only beginning. The morning after that night, I woke drenched in sweat, the echo of teeth clicking still resonating in my skull. My apartment smelled faintly of wet fabric and iron. I told myself it had been a dream, a fevered, grotesque dream, but the vest, folded neatly on my chair, contradicted that reasoning. It lay there innocuously, black as midnight, silent, yet undeniably aware. I tried to touch it, to examine it, but the instant my fingers brushed the fabric, a shiver ran through me, and I recoiled. The vest shifted slightly, subtle, like the twitch of a snake in its sleep. My reflection in the bedroom mirror betrayed me. My eyes were wide, pupils dilated, hands trembling as I adjusted the collar. There was no way to rationalize what I had seen, what I had felt. Something was inside that fabric, living, intelligent, and hungry. Work was no refuge. Every keyboard click, every swipe of my phone, every faint vibration seemed amplified, as if the world itself echoed the hunger that clung to my arm. I avoided looking at the vest directly, but my peripheral vision betrayed its presence. Shadows pooled unnaturally around it, stretching along the walls, twisting with impossible angles. That evening, curiosity, or some darker impulse, drove me to return to the alley. I needed to understand what I had been dragged into. The entrance to the supper club seemed more unwelcoming in daylight, but the rain had subsided. Puddles reflected the gray sky, flickering like fractured mirrors. I hesitated at the doorway, heart hammering, but the memory of that whisper, Claire's voice, twisted, pleading, commanding, drew me forward. Inside, the air was different. Warmer, heavier, saturated with scents I could not name. Roasted meat, iron, and something sweet, cloying, almost like decay. The other guests were absent, leaving only the tables, chairs, and that omnipresent darkness that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. I noticed it first. The faint, wet undulation of the vest in my bag, though it lay folded, dormant. I removed the vest carefully. It felt heavier than before, almost warm. A low, subtle hum emanated from the fabric, barely perceptible, yet undeniable. I pressed it to my chest, the sensation more like a heartbeat than cloth. My stomach turned, my breath shallow. I tried to convince myself it was a psychological echo from the night before, but as I slid it on, the buttons resisted slightly, tightening against my torso as if testing, as if asserting dominance. Then it moved, slowly, with deliberation. The vest stretched along my shoulders, the lining shifting beneath my hands like muscles contracting under skin. I heard a soft, wet click, and my blood ran cold. The faint sound of whispering followed, layered, overlapping, incomprehensible words repeated with insistence. Feed me, feed me, feed me. I bolted upright in my chair, fumbling for the doorknob. The whispers escalated, merging with a sucking, wet noise as though the fabric was gnawing at the air itself. My reflection in the mirror, what little light the room afforded, seemed to pulse with the vest's rhythm. Shadows shifted unnaturally, fingers reaching just beyond the edge of vision, brushing the walls, tugging at the corners. Panic consumed me, but I could not remove the vest. The buttons were fused now, the fabric clinging, squeezing, alive. I tried yanking at the hem, feeling something resist, something cold and wet gripping my arms. I dropped to the floor, desperate, but the vest coiled with a soft hissing satisfaction, almost playful, almost sentient. The whispers now became laughter, high-pitched, gurgling, impossible. Claire's voice, again, pleading, mocking. "Feed it, Jess. Feed it." My mind raced, piecing fragments together. The supper club, the guests, the invitation, the vest, it was all part of a ritual, a hunger ritual. And somehow I was chosen, marked, trapped. The garment had claimed me, and it demanded sustenance. The very thought made my stomach lurch. I did not yet know what kind of feeding it required, but instinct screamed that denial was impossible. The vest twitched violently, coiling around my torso with unnatural speed. My hands clawed at it, feeling the sharp, tiny teeth pressing through the fabric, leaving superficial cuts, small red lines that burned. My heart raced, sweat dripping onto the floor, slicking my palms. A sudden tug jerked me backward, nearly toppling over, and the vest seemed to constrict and protest, tightening around my neck, shoulders, chest. It hissed softly, wetly, a sound that was almost like breathing. And then the hunger spoke in a voice more coherent than before. Clear, singular, terrifying in its calmness. "You will feed us, or we will feed on you." I froze. The room seemed to shrink, the ceiling pressing down, walls bending inward, the floor undulating beneath me. I could hear distant footsteps, the other guests, or perhaps shadows moving independently, coming closer, circling, invisible, but palpably present. I tried to scream, to throw the vest off, but my voice caught in my throat. The fabric shifted over my mouth, brushing my lips, soft and wet. I felt it probing, testing, hungry. I bolted to the bathroom, the wet sound of the vest's internal movements echoing behind me. The mirror showed me, gaunt, eyes wide with terror, as if the reflection itself had aged in these few frantic minutes. The vest twitched, a slow, deliberate crawl across my torso. My hands grasped at the buttons, praying for release, but as I pulled, a sharp, wet sensation flared along my forearm, a bite. Teeth sinking, sharp, precise, leaving a long, thin welt. I screamed, raw, high-pitched, the sound echoing back as if amplified by the walls themselves. A whisper followed, intimate, close, almost breathing in my ear. "It hungers, Jessica. Always. Always." I collapsed to the floor, my back against the wall, trembling. The vest had paused, coiled around my body like a predator resting after a brief hunt. Its hum slowed, but I could feel the anticipation vibrating through the fibers, reaching into my skin, into my bones. I realized then that this hunger was patient, endless, and now I was part of its waiting. The room darkened, as if absorbing the light. Outside, the city continued indifferent, oblivious to the ritual, oblivious to me. The hunger stirred within the vest, alive, pulsing, waiting for the night to return, for the supper club to call again. And in that moment, I understood. I would never be free of it. Never. I could only curl on the floor, hands clutching the vest, shivering, listening to the wet, gurgling whisper, knowing it was alive, knowing it was hungry, knowing it had already tasted me. And somewhere deep in my mind, a tiny, rational thought whispered, terrified and helpless, "This is only the beginning." The air in my apartment had changed. It was thick, almost viscous, carrying a scent that was both metallic and sweet, like iron left to ferment. The vest lay across my chair as though it had never moved, yet I felt its weight even when I wasn't touching it. I should have left it there, should have fled the city, should have burned it. But the hunger, the quiet, insistent hunger, had embedded itself into me, and a part of me, a foolish, trembling part, wanted to see what it needed. That evening, I returned to the supper club. The streets were slick with rain, neon signs bleeding colors across the puddles. I walked with hesitant steps, the vest in my bag, humming faintly, like a heartbeat against my thigh. The door creaked open, and I was immediately enveloped by the same heady air. Roasted meat, damp earth, something almost floral, but decayed. There were no guests yet, but I sensed them, lurking just beyond my perception. I placed the vest on the table before me, the hum growing louder. The fabric seemed to pulse, expanding slightly, contracting, almost breathing. I could feel it through my hands, as if its hunger had a physical temperature, a pressure that pressed against my palms. And then it began, a subtle vibration, crawling along the fabric toward my chest, my neck, my face. The first bite. It wasn't teeth, not exactly, but it pressed and scraped against my skin with a deliberate, calculating rhythm. A soft, wet sound accompanied each movement, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. I gasped, tried to pull back, but my hands were trapped, tangled in the vest's folds. My own reflection in the polished table surface was distorted. A mask of terror pressed back at me. "Feed me," it whispered. The voice was no longer Claire's alone. It was layered, many voices intertwined, some childish, some deep, some entirely alien. Each syllable slid beneath my skin like icy fingers, threading through my nerves, wrapping around my chest, demanding, urging. I realized then that feeding was not about food. It was about offering myself, in pieces, in attention, in fear. The vest wanted everything, my senses, my energy, my will. I felt a pull in my temples, a tug in the pit of my stomach. My vision wavered, flickering, and I caught glimpses of impossible shapes in the room. Chairs leaning at unnatural angles, shadows moving independently, walls breathing subtly, expanding and contracting as though alive. I tried to rise, to leave, but the vest pulled me down, coiling around my shoulders and torso. It was patient, savoring each moment, testing me, teasing me. The whispering escalated into a chorus, the sound of fabric stretching over soft surfaces, of teeth gnawing something too large to name. The hunger was awake, insistent, a predator, savoring its prey before the kill. A sudden movement startled me. The buttons along the vest's front shifted, tiny, needle-like teeth appearing along the seams. They grazed my skin lightly, drawing thin, red lines. Pain or perhaps sensation radiated through me, a reminder of my vulnerability, of my submission. I trembled, choking on my own breath. "It's not enough," the voice said. I realized then that I was part of a ritual, part of a cycle that had claimed many before me. The supper club, the invitations, the guests, the garments, they were all vessels, conduits for this hunger, feeding it, sustaining it. And now, I was included. The vest twitched violently, wrapping around my neck, chest, shoulders, securing me like a living harness. I tried to speak, to cry out, but only muffled sounds emerged, swallowed by the wet, coiling fabric. My arms were pinned to my sides. Every pulse of the vest against my skin was a heartbeat, a rhythm of domination, a reminder that I was nothing more than a meal in waiting. I felt it probing, exploring, learning the shape of me. Every nerve ending became a point of sensation. Fear, pain, exhilaration, confusion. The vest whispered in my ear, warm and wet. "Do you understand, Jess? The feeding is mutual. We hunger. You feed. We consume. We become. Together." And then, the vest constricted, not painfully but firmly, insistently. It pulled me close to the table, the polished surface now reflecting a distorted, elongated version of my body. The room around me pulsed in time with the vest's hunger. I could see shadows pooling at the corners, writhing, stretching, grasping. The air seemed to thicken, pressing against my chest, my lungs, my mind. A sudden sensation of teeth scraping lightly against my collarbone made me flinch. I felt a sharpness, a bite, a nibble, not enough to break the skin, but enough to assert control. It was a test, and I was failing. I whimpered, the sound swallowed by the vest's embrace, a soft, gurgling laugh emanating from the folds of fabric. I realized that feeding was about attention, about surrendering my will. I let go, slowly, trembling, giving in to the vest's movements, letting it guide my arms, my posture, my focus. The whispers became coherent, urging me to acknowledge the hunger, to participate, to sustain it. "Yes," I breathed, the word trembling on my lips. "Yes, I understand." The vest paused, coiling softly, almost approvingly. The chorus of whispers fell silent for a moment, leaving only the wet, pulsing heartbeat of the fabric against my chest. I felt a strange sense of relief, a temporary reprieve, as if the hunger had accepted my submission, my recognition of its existence. But the calm was fleeting. The vest began to pulse again, faster, more insistently, testing the limits of my endurance. I realized then that the feeding had only begun. Each night, each encounter, each moment of fear and surrender would feed it further. I was now part of the supper club's ritual, a participant in a cycle of hunger and consumption that had no end. The whispers returned, layered, insistent, demanding. We hunger. You feed. We become. Together. And in that moment, I understood. There would be no escape. The vest had claimed me. It was alive. It was patient. And it would wait. Always. Hungering. Until I fed it again. I collapsed to the floor, chest heaving, sweat slicking my skin. The vest coiled around me like a living thing. The room pulsed. Shadows writhing. Whispering. Waiting. I had fed, but only partially. The hunger stirred. Restless. Patient. Eternal. Outside, the city continued, indifferent, unaware. But I knew the truth. I had crossed a line. I had become part of the ritual, part of the supper club, and there would be no return. The vest hummed against me, alive, waiting. And deep in my mind, a single, terrified thought echoed. This is only the beginning. I had no illusions anymore. The vest, the supper club, the whispers, they were not mistakes, nor curiosities. They were inevitabilities, ancient and deliberate. Every sense I had was overwhelmed, every nerve screaming that this was a confrontation I could not avoid. Tonight, I would face what I had been running from, and I would either survive or become another layer of the hunger. The apartment was dimly lit, rain lashing against the windows. Shadows pooled in corners, stretching unnaturally, as if the walls themselves had teeth. I stepped toward the chair where the vest lay coiled, a predator at rest. My hands shook as I reached for it, my fingertips brushing the slick, damp fabric. The vest shivered at my touch, responding to the recognition, acknowledging the bond that had formed. You came back, the voice whispered from the folds, layered and distorted, Claire and others merging into one insistent tone. You cannot run. I swallowed my fear. I won't run, I whispered back, my voice trembling. We end this tonight. The vest responded immediately, tightening around my shoulders, pulling me forward, pressing my chest against the table. I felt the wetness, the heartbeat of the fabric against me, trying to absorb my resolve. Its hunger was palpable, a living weight pressing into my skin. Yet, I didn't recoil. I decided I would confront it, control it, or perish trying. I reached inside the folds, pushing through the fabric, finding the hidden lining. There was something there, a small, lumpy mass, warm and pliant. The vest thrummed as I touched it, almost like a purr. I realized it was the core, the seat of its consciousness. Every thread, every whisper converged here. If I could destroy this, perhaps I could sever the bond. Perhaps I could end the cycle. Do you think you can control us? The chorus hissed, edges of teeth appearing along seams, the fabric twitching like a living animal. We are older than you, hungrier than you, faster than your mind can grasp. I gritted my teeth, drawing a deep, trembling breath. I had prepared for this, learned from the nights I had endured, the pain I had endured. Using both hands, I gripped the core, twisting, tearing, trying to pull it free. The vest convulsed violently, coiling around my arms, my chest, my neck, trying to resist. I felt the teeth along its seams press into my skin, small but precise, reminding me that every move was a negotiation with a predator that thrived on submission. The whispers escalated into a cacophony, voices overlapping, laughter, crying, pleading, anger. You can't! It's mine! Feed! The vest writhed against me, jerking, pulling me down to the floor, dragging me across the slick hardwood. I refused to let go. My hands clamped around the core, squeezing, twisting, trying to break it apart. Pain radiated through me, hot and sharp, but I didn't falter. A sudden surge. The vest expanded, enveloping my head, pressing against my face, and I inhaled the scent. Iron, blood, damp cloth. 1,000 mouths breathing at once. Panic clawed at me, but I forced it back, focusing on the core, focusing on the goal. Destroy it, end it, survive. With a final, desperate twist, I felt it tear. A sound erupted, high-pitched, wet, a tearing of fabric and flesh combined. The vest convulsed violently, then collapsed inward, slack, quivering. The voices screamed, then fell into silence. The heartbeat, the pulsing, the wet warmth, all gone. I gasped, my chest heaving, blood from shallow bites and scratches mingling with sweat. The apartment was still. The rain had eased, leaving only the distant sound of dripping water and the faint hum of the city outside. I looked at the vest lying on the floor. It was just fabric now, lifeless. I wanted to believe it was over. I wanted to feel relief. But as I took a step back, my eyes caught something in the corner of the room. Shadows had gathered. Not quite shapes, not quite nothing. A whisper, soft, almost human. We are still here, waiting. I realized then that this was not a creature that could be destroyed. The vest, the hunger, the supper club, they were conduits, carriers of something eternal, something that found new hosts, new bodies, new nights to haunt. I had survived, yes, but I had survived with knowledge. Knowledge that I would carry forever. Knowledge that if I ever let my guard down, if I ever returned, the hunger would awaken again. I gathered the vest carefully, placing it in a sealed bag, determined to lock it away, to bury it, to exile it from my life. Yet even as I did so, a faint twitch, almost imperceptible, sent a shiver down my spine. The core had been damaged, perhaps destroyed, but the essence, the hunger, lingered, patient, restless, eternal. The night stretched on. I couldn't sleep, couldn't rest. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the fabric against my skin, smelled the iron, heard the whispers just beyond the edge of hearing, and I knew the supper club was never truly gone. It was in me now, a memory, a warning, a pulse. By morning, I was a different person, warier, quieter, changed. The vest was gone, sealed, hidden, but I knew, somewhere, someone would be invited again. Someone would wear it, someone would feed it, and the hunger would begin anew. I survived, yes, but the hunger waits, and it always will. I never wanted to watch. I never wanted to bear witness. But that is the thing about the supper club. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't care if you consent. By the time it finds you, you are already a part of it, a spectator in its hunger, a participant in its ritual. The rain had stopped, but the city felt damp and hollow. I had spent the day in a fragile, tense peace, thinking the vest and its hunger had been contained. I had locked it away, wrapped and sealed. Yet something in the air whispered that containment was an illusion. A siren moaned in the distance. I heard it like a pulse matching my own heartbeat. And I knew the hunger was not gone. That night, I returned to the apartment, compelled by something I did not understand. The hallway was dark, the lights flickering weakly above. Each step echoed too loudly, as though the building itself was listening, judging. My apartment door creaked open. The bag with the vest lay in the corner, untouched. Or so I thought. A movement caught my eye. Shadows pooled at the edge of the room, stretching toward me, then receding. I held my breath. The silence was heavy, suffocating, broken only by the faint click of the lock turning in the bag. Slowly, almost deliberately, the vest began to stir. The folds quivered, like a living thing, inhaling, smelling, tasting the air. I wanted to run. My feet wouldn't obey. My hands trembled, clutching at the bag, trying to hold it down. A soft sound, a wet, sliding noise came from the folds. A voice, her voice, the voice of the friend who had lent me the vest. Claire whispered, distant yet intimate. It's time. Watch, feed, or be fed. The vest expanded suddenly, pushing against the bag as if testing its confinement. I fell backward onto the floor, scrambling, hard hammering. The fabric burst free, unfurling like a predator, unfurling wings. The edges of the vest rippled, teeth along seams gleaming faintly in the moonlight that bled through the window. I realized, with a shock that froze me, that the hunger had grown stronger, more cunning, more aware. I grabbed the core again, twisting and pressing it, trying to control it, to suppress it. The vest writhed violently, the teeth biting, the folds slamming into me like battering rams. It whispered incessantly, "You cannot end us. You are part of us. We are endless. We are hunger." Panic clawed at me. I could feel the hunger probing my mind, invading my thoughts. Memories of the supper club, the parties, the missing friends, the laughter and the screams, they swirled in my head like a storm. The vest tried to pull me in, drag me into the room as though it could consume not only my body but my very consciousness. I shouted, a raw, desperate sound, and slammed the vest onto the floor. It hissed, recoiling, then lunged at me, the teeth snapping, the fabric tightening around my shoulders. I felt it burrow into me, a living, sentient weight pressing against my chest. I gasped, claws of panic gripping my mind, my lungs, my heart. This is it, I thought. This is the end. But something within me resisted. Perhaps it was the memory of every scream I had heard, every whisper I had endured. Perhaps it was the stubborn, fragile thread of willpower I had left. I reached into the vest, seeking the core, the heart of the hunger. My fingers found it warm, pliant, and pulsing. I squeezed. I twisted. I wrenched. Pain flared, hot and biting, across my skin, but I didn't release my grip. A scream erupted from the vest, a chorus of voices merging into one unbearable wail. The fabric convulsed violently, thrashing against me. The teeth sank in deeper, the folds constricting, but I held on. Every ounce of strength, every trembling thought focused on this singular act. I would not be consumed. Not tonight, not ever. And then the core tore. The wail cut off mid-note, leaving only a sharp, wet, tearing sound. The vest collapsed onto the floor, inert, slack, teeth no longer gleaming. The apartment was silent, except for my own ragged breathing. I sat there for a long time, heart racing, fingers clutching empty air where the core had been. I thought it was over. I thought I'd survived the final watch. But the hunger is patient. It waits. I looked at the vest lying there, now apparently harmless. A faint twitch, imperceptible at first, then unmistakable, rippled along the seam. I realized then that survival does not mean victory. Containment does not mean destruction. The supper club, the vest, the hunger, they would awaken again. Perhaps not tonight, perhaps not tomorrow, but they would wait, and when they did, they would find someone new. I knew I would never be the same. The hunger had marked me, left a memory, a pulse that I could not escape. Every night, every shadow, every whisper reminded me. I had witnessed it. I had touched it. I had survived it. But the final watch was not truly over. It was a loop, an eternal test, a cycle that would continue as long as the world allowed it. I left the apartment at dawn, the vest sealed and stored, but the weight of the night stayed with me. Every step, every breath, every heartbeat carried the echo of hunger. I walked into the world, aware that somewhere, someone else would be drawn to the supper club. Someone else would hear the whispers. Someone else would wear the vest. And the cycle would begin anew. The hunger waits, always, watching, patient, eternal. And I, for now, am its witness. You've walked through abandoned factories, haunted games, rain-drenched streets, cursed mirrors, and a supper club of eternal hunger. 5 stories, 5 nights of whispered terror, each leaving a trace on the mind that cannot be unseen, unheard, or unremembered. If your heart is still racing, if the shadows seem a little too close, know that the midnight never truly ends. The echoes linger, the whispers wait, and somewhere in the dark, another story begins. Thank you for joining me on this journey through fear. Sleep well, if you can.